757 Human Sacred Palace, Sage Battle Halberd. 757 Human Sacred Palace, Sage Battle Halberd. Power is not the only thing that the supreme god of man left behind for us. As soon as immortal ancestor Shu Cheng said this, the expressions of the other 4 immortal ancestors changed. Clearly, they had also thought of something. The immortal ancestor Yuling looked like a young woman. Her appearance could be said to be beautiful. She frowned and asked curiously, Shu Cheng, do you mean the 9 things in the human sacred palace? No. Immortal ancestor Luo Qian interrupted very decisively and shook his head repeatedly. No, definitely not. The things in the human sacred palace can't be touched. It's best if we don't even open the human sacred palace. I think that at this point, even if we use the supreme treasure in the human sacred palace, the situation won't be worse than now, immortal ancestor Hanming said in a low voice. You've all seen how powerful Kui Heng is. If we don't restrain him as soon as possible, we won't have a chance. Ancestor Huang Yun, what do you think? Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng looked at immortal ancestor Huang Yun. Immortal ancestor Huang Yun was an old man with white hair and a youthful face. He was the oldest among the 9 immortal ancestors. He was also the leader in the battle to expel the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Shu Cheng only caught up to him later. Therefore, although the immortal ancestors were led by immortal ancestor Shu Cheng, they still addressed immortal ancestor Huang Yun as ancestor. His opinion was also very important. Kui Heng needs to be executed, immortal ancestor Huang Yun said firmly. Kui Heng's next goal is very clear. He wants to occupy an even more ancient timeline. This way, he will inevitably touch on the period when we haven't become immortal ancestors yet. He might even come into contact with the supreme god of man. At that time, you and I might be erased from existence. Our countless years of timeline since we became immortal ancestors will completely collapse. We can't let such a thing happen, immortal ancestor Hanming said. But the danger of opening the human sacred palace and using the halberd is too great. Immortal ancestor Luo Qian looked around at everyone and asked solemnly, aren't you afraid of the divine resurrection of the supreme god of man? So much time has passed, and the power left behind by the supreme god of man has all been claimed, immortal ancestor Hanming said. It's impossible for him to revive. Are you really confident? Immortal ancestor Luo Qian looked at immortal ancestor Hanming and questioned. So what if I can't guarantee it? Immortal ancestor Hanming snorted. Opening the human sacred palace and using the sage battle halberd is no doubt very risky. But if we don't restrain or kill Kui Heng, we'll definitely suffer a calamity. Can you accept such an outcome? Can't we think of other ways? Immortal ancestor Luo Qian sighed, but his tone was clearly much weaker. All right. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng stopped the argument and said, Kui Heng must be killed. Otherwise, we'll never have a day of peace. Moreover, we have to do it as soon as possible. If we drag it out, I'm afraid we won't have any other chance. I suggest opening the human sacred palace and inviting out the sage battle halberd. The 5 of us will join forces to kill Kui Heng. At the very least, we'll exile him to the spatial turbulence. I have no objections. Immortal ancestor Hanming was the first to express his stand. Fine. Immortal ancestor Huang Yun nodded in agreement. The immortal ancestor Yuling hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she nodded and said, all right, this is the only way. Immortal ancestor Luo Qian was silent for a moment before saying helplessly, I'll follow everyone's decision. But when we use the sage battle halberd, we have to be extremely careful. There's no need to worry about that. We know very well the risk of opening the human sacred palace and using the sage battle halberd. Shu Chengxian nodded slightly and said in a low voice, since everyone has agreed, there's no time to lose. Let's open the human sacred palace now. Too many years had passed since the battle where the 9 immortal ancestors followed the supreme god of man and expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Almost no one knew what happened in that era. Because the status and power of the immortal ancestors came from the power left behind by the supreme god of man, the earliest timeline they could occupy could only be from the time of the supreme god of man's Tao transformation. Similarly, The level and source of power of the heaven-earth saints was the Tao transformation of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Therefore, they could only trace back and occupy the timeline from the time period when the Tao transformation of the supreme gods of heaven and earth took place. No one could trace back to the time when the supreme god of man divinely expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth in battle. The living beings who had once lived in that era had already died out in the long passage of time. Only the 9 immortal ancestors had survived that era. Other than them, no one knew what had happened in that era. That era was also the time period where they were the weakest. If someone could return to that era, they could directly kill them at the source, completely changing the timeline for countless years. Therefore, the 9 immortal ancestors had been trying their best to hide that era and did not allow the secrets of that ancient era to be known, let alone tolerate anyone returning to that era. The human sacred palace was one of the greatest secrets of that era. In order to hide the past, even the 9 immortal ancestors were deliberately avoiding touching on matters related to the human sacred palace. Among them, the most important thing was the 9 treasures personally forged by the supreme god of man, the sage battle halberds. This was an extremely terrifying supreme treasure. It was a material that the supreme god of man had found in the original ancient land. Then, he had spent more than 1,000 primeval eras to forge it. Therefore, the sage battle halberd could be said to be a perfect weapon. It could be said to be flawless in terms of materials, forging, power, and so on. It was precisely such a supreme treasure that allowed Xu Cheng and the others, who were not immortal ancestors at that time, to directly possess the strength to fight the supreme gods of heaven and earth. However, be it the remaining 5 immortal ancestors or the 4 immortal ancestors who were in a dead or missing state, they no longer came into contact with the sage battle halberd after completely fusing with the power left behind by the supreme god of man. The 9 sage battle halberds were permanently sealed in the human sacred palace at the top of the 9th heaven. It had been too long since anyone had touched them. 758 Human Sacred Palace, Sage Battle Halberd, 2. 758 Human Sacred Palace, Sage Battle Halberd, 2. At this moment, immortal ancestor Xu Cheng, immortal ancestor Huang Yun, immortal ancestor Yuling, immortal ancestor Hanming, and immortal ancestor Luo Qian had arrived in front of the human sacred palace that they had been away from for countless years. Looking at this majestic and magnificent human sacred palace, memories that they had deliberately avoided surged into their hearts, as if lights and shadows flashed before their eyes. That was countless years ago, an era so ancient that it could not be traced back. At that time, the human sacred palace was not here. Instead, it was located on the ground. Corresponding to it were the Heavenly Emperor Palace and the Earth Imperial Palace. They were respectively the Tao grounds of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. The 3 supreme gods of heaven, earth, and man were the absolute rulers of this world at that time. In that era, the fledgling humans had yet to grasp the concept of cultivation and were incomparably weak. Any beast with some strength could treat the humans as food. The supreme gods of heaven and earth did not care about these things. To them, the human race was only an expansion of the concept derived by the supreme god of man. They were a part of the supreme god of man, so there was naturally no need for them to care. Even the supreme god of man did not really care about them. Humans were just a form of living beings that were born naturally during the expansion of his concept. There was no need to care about them at all. Just like how the supreme god of heaven would not care about the laws of the great Tao that were born naturally, and the supreme god of earth would not care about the mountains and rivers that were born naturally. Therefore, it was extremely difficult for the earliest humans to survive. Apart from having intelligence, critical thinking, and learning capabilities, they were otherwise very weak. Later on, the supreme god of man discovered the benefits of making the human race stronger, so he began to interfere in the development of the human race. That was because in essence, the human race was the expansion of the supreme god of man's creation concept. Therefore, in theory, the stronger the human race was, the stronger the supreme god of man would be. As long as there were more and more experts in the human race, the strength of the supreme god of man would continue to grow. This growth speed was much faster than the natural expansion of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. The efficiency was completely incomparable. Actually, This was also one of the important reasons why the supreme god of man was able to expel the supreme gods of heaven and earth from the primordial world. Hence, the supreme god of man chose hundreds of people from the human race and taught them the method to control the great Tao laws and seize the creation of the world. In the end, 37 people became followers of the supreme god of man and were allowed to live in the human sacred palace. These 37 people were also the main helpers when the later generations expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth. However, 28 of them had already died in that final battle. Only the 9 strongest experts holding the sage battle halberds had survived. In other words, the 9 immortal ancestors. There were too many things in that period of history that they did not want to remember. It was also the time when they were the weakest and most helpless. The human sacred palace and the 9 sage battle halberds contained the darkest secrets in their hearts that they did not dare to let others know. Boom! Amidst a series of loud bangs, the huge door of the human sacred palace that had been sealed for countless years slowly opened. Endless dignified aura surged into the perception of the 5 immortal ancestors. Even though they were no longer weak, even though they had already become immortal ancestors and had sat above the world for countless years, they still could not help but feel their hearts palpitate when they saw the door of the human sacred palace open. After a while, the 5 of them barely calmed down. However, just as they were about to enter the human sacred palace, their expressions suddenly changed. It's Kui Heng. He has descended on the 11th chaos calamity. He's interfering with that timeline. Damn it, he's really going to gradually occupy an even more ancient timeline. We can't let this person live. We have to kill him. Let's go in. We'll take the sage battle halberds and kill Kui Heng. The sudden change once again strengthened the 5 immortal ancestors' determination to kill Kui Heng. In the eyes of these 5 immortal ancestors, they were mortal enemies. There was no room for reconciliation. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng and immortal ancestor Huang Yun walked at the front. Immortal ancestor Yuling, immortal ancestor Hanming, and immortal ancestor Luo Qian followed closely behind and walked into the dark and silent human sacred palace. They had once lived here for a long time, so they were very familiar with the layout here. They found their destination with ease. In the deepest part of the human sacred palace, there was a hall with exquisite and ancient patterns on the wall. But the entire place was a gloomy black, as if it had been stained with dried blood. The 5 immortal ancestors stood in front of the hall and stopped. After seeing the gloomy blackness on the wall, their eyes flickered, and it was unknown what they were thinking. We're already here, so there's no need to think too much, immortal ancestor Shu Cheng said in a low voice. So much time has passed, and there are also 2 portions of the divine inheritance in Kui Heng's hands. It's impossible for him to revive. That's right. Immortal ancestor Huang Yun nodded and said, the countless years can wash away everything. He has long transformed into Tao and no longer exists. With that, the 2 of them walked forward and pushed open the door of the hall. The gloomy blackness stuck to their hands like dried blood. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The moment the door was opened, a cold wind blew out, causing the surrounding atmosphere to suddenly become extremely oppressive. The 5 immortal ancestors could not help but shiver. Then, they looked into the hall from the door and could see 9 huge halberds stuck straight into the ground, forming a circle, as if they were surrounding something in the center. If one took a closer look, they would be able to see that there seemed to be something stuck at the bottom of the 9 huge halberds. They were like 9 nails that nailed something to the ground. Go in. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng took a deep breath and said in a low voice. He was the first to walk into the hall. Immortal ancestor Huang Yun also followed. The remaining 3 immortal ancestors looked at each other and went in as well. Bang! The door of the hall suddenly closed. The river of time flowed vastly, and Kui Heng continued to swim against the current. Just now, he had already established a true spatial Tao mark in the 11th chaos calamity and successfully established his existence in this time point, completing the occupation of this timeline. After this, Kui Heng did not stop. Instead, he continued to travel forward. After crossing countless years, he finally arrived at the time when the 4th chaos calamity erupted. He descended as usual and played an important role in the process of the immortal ancestor's death, forming a true spatial Tao mark. After this, he would fabricate and trace an identity in the timeline and finally solidify it to occupy the timeline. The entire process was incomparably smooth and there were almost no obstacles. Kui Heng even felt that the immortal ancestors had not descended from the current time, nor did they attempt to stop him. This puzzled him after occupying these two timelines. In the Pure Yang Palace. What's going on? What did those 5 immortal ancestors go to do? Kui Heng frowned slightly. He was still sitting cross-legged on the meditation cushion and thought to himself, could it be that they've placed all their preparations in a more ancient timeline? From my previous actions, it shouldn't be difficult for them to guess that my next target is the time of the first chaos calamity. Are they giving up on all the obstacles here and gathering all their strength to wait for me there? 759 The cause of the first chaos calamity. 759 The cause of the first chaos calamity. Kui Heng felt that his guess was very likely. From the previous few battles, the strength of the immortal ancestors would be affected by the completeness of the primordial world. The more complete the primordial world was, the stronger the immortal ancestors would be. The primordial world before the first chaos calamity was undoubtedly very complete. Although the primordial world had already experienced the battle between the 3 supreme gods of heaven, earth, and man at that time and the state of the world was far inferior to the initial period, it was still the most complete state in the last 300 primeval eras. Therefore, the 9 immortal ancestors at this time were definitely at their strongest. If they wanted to choose a time to attack him, it was undoubtedly the most suitable time to choose the time before the first chaos calamity. However, even with the strength of the complete primordial world, judging by the strength displayed by those immortal ancestors, they shouldn't be able to compare to my current strength. Kui Heng thought to himself, I've successfully occupied more than 200 primeval eras and my fake selves are spread throughout this spacetime. The ball of light that represents my great Tao has also enveloped this timeline. My current strength is already countless times stronger than when I just broke through to the late-stage return to Void Realm. Under normal circumstances, these immortal ancestors shouldn't be my match. However, they have once followed the supreme god of man to expel the supreme gods of heaven and earth after all. They definitely have unknown powers. I can't let my guard down. In terms of spells and techniques, I'm more than capable of attacking, but I'm lacking in defense. It's best if I can grasp a powerful defensive Dharma spell to deal with possible attacks. The origins and foundation of the 9 immortal ancestors are extraordinary. I have to make proper preparations. If I rashly retrace the timeline, there might be a problem. After making up his mind, he directly ordered the system. Consume 100 points of origin power and use the high-level immortal technique, from initiate to ascension to deduce spells. The direction of deduction is defense. Congratulations! You have used 100 points of origin power to successfully deduce the defensive spell, Black-Yellow Pagoda. Black-Yellow Pagoda. Qi is divided into yin and yang, black and yellow. Taiji is the source of all things. This spell condenses black-yellow qi in its initial state to form a 12-layer pagoda. If it's suspended 3 feet above the head, all evils will be warded off, and myriad dharmas will not invade. The moment the deduction was successful, extremely mysterious scenes appeared in front of Kui Heng's eyes as usual. This was a boundless void with nothing. Suddenly, chaos was born. Then, the chaos was first opened, and everything began. Time began to flow, surging from the beginning to the end. As the vast river of time surged, chaotic qi collided, and the world was born. Everything began to appear, but they were in an extremely unstable state. The cycle of life and death was endless. This cycle of life and death continued for an unknown period of time before an anomaly appeared. In the process of the countless chaotic qi colliding, the first wisp of black-yellow qi appeared and began to stabilize the chaotic laws and principles. In the end, it formed a stable world, and the cycle of life and death was stopped. The initial black-yellow qi had also become unprecedentedly strong, condensing into a pagoda that had the power to suppress all the laws of heaven and earth and stabilize all chaos. Suppress everything and stabilize everything. Kui Heng closed his eyes slightly and understood something. He thought to himself, whether it's martial techniques or spells, as long as it's an attack, The essence of it is to change the current situation and turn stability into chaos. This way, as long as I freeze the state of all things such that it can't be changed, stabilize everything and prevent the natural state of things from turning into chaos, I can avoid suffering any attacks. All evils will be warded off, and myriad dharmas will not invade. Black-Yellow Pagoda. Good spell. Kui Heng currently did not need to use much time to cultivate spells. The moment he obtained the spell, he could raise it to the peak, matching his current cultivation realm. Although the Black-Yellow Pagoda spell was mysterious, it was the same. Therefore, after deducing the Black-Yellow Pagoda, Kui Heng did not delay any longer and began to rewind time. The river of time was vast and endless. He moved up again and used the fourth Chaos Calamity as the starting point to head to the time before the first Chaos Calamity erupted. Scenes of the ancient past flashed across Kui Heng's eyes. The many battles between the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea formed continuous images of lights and shadows that he could see clearly. This was also the process of understanding all kinds of information about the past. With Kui Heng's extremely powerful divine sense, he saw everything that happened in the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea in these ancient times. A huge amount of information and many secrets were gathered by his perception, allowing him to approach the all-knowing level. At the same time, the great Tao ball of light that symbolizes his cultivation realm also began to continuously expand the range of its illumination, slowly spreading towards an even more ancient time point. This would allow Kui Heng to possess power that matched his knowledge. His essence of life would also sublimate to the extreme and further approach the all-knowing realm. The great Tao laws of the primordial world are becoming more and more complete. Kui Heng thought to himself. However, this is still in a state of great destruction. I have to continue forward. Boom. In a daze, Kui Heng heard a loud bang on the river of time. It was as if countless universes had shattered below, and the primordial world was shaking. The originally intact ground had shattered. This was the first time the chaos calamity had erupted. The heaven-earth saints appeared in front of the immortal ancestors for the first time. Both sides attacked with all their might, and the primordial world was actually on the verge of collapse. However, Kui Heng did not stop at this time. His goal this time was not to leave behind a spatial Tao mark in the first chaos calamity, but to go back to before the first chaos calamity erupted. He wanted to investigate and participate in the cause of this calamity that would affect the future 300 Primeval eras. 760 The cause of the first chaos calamity, 2. 760 The cause of the first chaos calamity, 2. As Kui Heng went back in time, the turbulence of the river of time gradually calmed down. It was not until he went back 300 Primeval eras that the river of time completely calmed down. At this time, the aura of the primordial world was incomparably stable, but it was tightly wrapped up by the endless universe in the chaos sea, and it was almost impossible for it to expand and develop. On this seemingly calm surface, there was a huge contradiction. I'm here. Kui Heng thought to himself. Then, he used Eon Light Evasion to descend to this extremely ancient time without anyone noticing. This time was different from before. Other than leaving a spatial Tao mark at this time point, his goal was to investigate the cause and effect of the first chaos calamity, so he did not intend to directly clash with the 9 immortal ancestors. Therefore, he used Eon Light Evasion to cover his tracks when he descended. If they want to wait for me, I'm afraid it won't be so easy. Kui Heng had descended outside a large city in the middle of the primordial world. This large city was the largest on the ground. It had the most residents, the most experts, and was the strongest city. Because the first perfected heavenless realm immortal emperor was born here, it was named the Emperor Origin City. At this extremely ancient point in time, the primordial world was far more complete than in the future. Whether it was on the level of the great Tao laws or on the level of matter, it was the same. The cultivation environment in this era was much better than in the future. Therefore, under normal circumstances, there should be no fewer experts in this era than in the future. There might even be more. However, through investigating the past experiences of some immortal emperors, Kui Heng knew that there were fewer immortal emperors in this era than in the future. The reason was that an extremely long time had passed from this era to the present time. The many immortal emperors at the present time had been accumulated over a series of long years. The information that these immortal emperors know is completely different from what I see now. Kui Heng stood at the top of a tall mountain and looked at the Emperor Origin city in the distance. There are more than 100 ordinary immortal emperors and 5 perfected immortal emperors. And this is just one city. Although the scale of the Emperor Origin city was huge and there were many residents, it was still very small compared to the entire primordial world. There were many cities on this vast land. Even if they were not as huge as the Emperor Origin city, there were still many smaller cities. Moreover, when Kui Heng descended to the primordial world at this time, he realized that other than these cities of various sizes, there were also tribes gathered everywhere. Although these tribes were still in an uncivilized state, they were not weak. Some powerful tribes even had immortal emperors. From this, it could be seen that the number of immortal emperors in this era was definitely not small. It could even be said to be far more than the present time in the future. There are almost no living immortal emperors from this era in the future. Kui Heng thought to himself, their understanding of this era basically came from the descriptions of the immortal ancestors. It's seriously distorted. However, what was the reason for the 9 immortal ancestors hiding this information and what use could it have? Kui Heng was a little puzzled. Was this related to the eruption of the chaos calamity? As he guessed in his heart, he flew down from the peak of the mountain and entered the Emperor Origin city. Normally speaking, the entrance to the Emperor Origin city and the city wall had powerful defensive arrays. One had to have a special pass to enter the city. Otherwise, even immortal emperors would be stopped by the defensive array of the Emperor Origin city. However, to Kui Heng, who had already advanced to the late-stage return to Void Realm, such a defensive array formation was completely useless. It was impossible for it to have any effect on him. He walked in the Emperor Origin city like an ordinary human from the primordial world, sensing the changes of time in this land and all living beings. As Kui Heng came from the present, he could already see the future that would happen to this ancient time. Hence, everything from the immortal emperors to ordinary people appeared in his perception. Kui Heng clearly knew their thoughts and opinions on the current situation of the primordial world. There were no secrets. Through this, Kui Heng could roughly guess the reason for the first chaos calamity. The primordial world was restricted by the immeasurable universe and lost its development space. This caused many immortal emperors to lose the possibility of advancing further. They urgently want to make the primordial world larger. The information I was told about the chaos calamities was that the boundless chaos sea had attacked the primordial world in order to uphold the will of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. This reason is too far-fetched. After all, to the chaos sea, their development space is not limited. It can be expanded indefinitely. Attacking the primordial world has no substantial benefits for them. It would be much more reasonable for the perfected immortal emperors of the primordial world to be the ones who pushed against the chaos sea for the sake of their own development. But this is just the wishes of the immortal emperors. What does it have to do with the immortal ancestors? Another doubt appeared in his heart. However, this doubt was quickly answered in the future ending of the Emperor Origin city. Kui Heng's perception transcended time and he could clearly see that after the chaos calamity erupted, the first place that was attacked and destroyed in the primordial world was the Emperor Origin city. At that time, there was clearly an immortal ancestor nearby, but he had no intention of coming over to help. They could only watch helplessly as the Emperor Origin city was destroyed by the Heaven-Earth Saints. It was simply done on purpose. Coupled with the number of immortal emperors in the future, it was very easy to deduce a conclusion. To a certain extent, the chaos calamity was also a method used by the immortal ancestors to clean up some immortal emperors. But if that's the case, what's the reason for the immortal ancestors to want to kill the immortal emperors? It's impossible to reach the immortal ancestor realm with just cultivation. Kui Heng was still a little puzzled in his heart as he thought to himself, perhaps I can only obtain an answer when I personally ask the immortal ancestors. After making his decision, he did not stay any longer and directly left this time point to arrive at a time when the primordial world was shaking and the river of time was almost boiling. It was also the time when the first chaos calamity erupted. This time, Kui Heng did not use the Aeon Light evasion to hide his aura. Instead, he directly crossed the river of time and descended into the primordial world at this time. This time point was already a little different from the first chaos calamity in history. This was because the 9 immortal ancestors were not the only ones fighting the Heaven-Earth Saints. They were also holding 9 sage battle halberds this time. After Xu Cheng, Huang Yun, and the other immortal ancestors made their decision, they opened the human sacred palace at this time and invited out the sage battle halberds. However, before Kui Heng descended to this time point, they still had to fight against the Heaven-Earth Saints. Hence, in the first chaos calamity, the 9 immortal ancestors directly used the sage battle halberds. The supreme treasures personally made by the supreme god of man were extremely terrifying. After an immortal ancestor expert held the halberd, he could actually easily suppress 3 to 5 Heaven-Earth Saints. Such an improvement was too ridiculous and bizarre. The experts of the Chaos Sea could not resist it at all. Xu Cheng, Huang Yun, immortal ancestor Yuling, and the others also regained their confidence. At this moment, the 9 immortal ancestors suddenly sensed Kui Heng's aura crossing space and time to descend to this time point. They were immediately energized and clenched the sage battle halberds in their hand. Someone roared in a low voice. "He's here. Kill." 761-33 Layered Black-Yellow Pagoda. 761-33 Layered Black-Yellow Pagoda. The 9 immortal ancestors attacked at the same time, and 9 halberds slashed at Kui Heng. In an instant, boundless power illuminated the world. 9 lights that seemed to have come from the origins of time slashed across the sky, causing the entire primordial world to become incomparably silent. Although the attack seemed to only be targeted at this time point, it seemed to have pierced through the future and past, locking onto Kui Heng in the entire timeline, wanting to completely destroy him. Ever since the supreme god of man expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth, this was the first time that the scene of the 9 halberds attacking a single target at the same time appeared again in the primordial world. However, this time, they were no longer attacking the supreme gods of heaven and earth, but Kui Heng, who had descended to this era. Under such a huge destructive power, the entire primordial world began to tremble violently. The ground that was already riddled with holes began to crack, revealing large gaps spanning 4 to 5 kilometers. Countless tall mountains were collapsing, and countless rivers were boiling. Even the seemingly endless sea raised huge waves, as if the entire world was about to overturn. At the same time, 9 huge holes appeared in the sky. Universes collided with these holes one after another before being shattered by the power contained in the primordial world. Endless life and civilizations were destroyed. And this was only the aftershock caused by the 9 sage battle halberds being activated with all their might. Their true killing power was all gathered at one point as they attacked Kui Heng. The group of Heaven-Earth Saints who were fighting the 9 immortal ancestors just now were already dumbfounded. Looking at the 9 halberds, they felt their limbs turn cold. They were actually fighting the immortal ancestors who were wielding such terrifying weapons just now. They were actually not beaten to death. It was all thanks to the fact that they had enough experts and extremely strong undying characteristics. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. The essence of the power of the Heaven-Earth Saints came from the remnants of the supreme gods of heaven and earth's Tao transformation. In theory, it should be of the same essence as the immortal ancestors. However, although the power of the Heaven-Earth Saints came from the 2 supreme gods, there were many types of power, and they were not pure enough. The restrictions on mastering them were greater. Therefore, their overall strength was definitely weaker than the immortal ancestors. However, because the Heaven-Earth Saints were formed in the void, and the void was boundless, there were no restrictions to their growth, nor were there any borders. This also allowed the boundless Chaos Sea to expand into the void forever. It was not suppressed and imprisoned by the immeasurable universe like the primordial world and lost its potential to develop and expand. Therefore, the size of the boundless Chaos Sea was actually much larger than the primordial world. The gifts left behind by the supreme gods of heaven and earth would also increase as the Chaos Sea developed. This way, the concept of the supreme gods of heaven and earth would still naturally expand. The power they left behind would continue to strengthen, so the heaven and earth saints did not have a clear upper limit like the immortal ancestors. As long as the chaos sea was still expanding and the immeasurable universe was still growing, the upper limit of the number of heaven-earth saints would continue to increase. At the time of the first chaos calamity, the universe could contain an upper limit of 16 heaven-earth saints. Of course, only 15 people had actually reached this level. Coupled with the fact that the heaven-earth saints had an extremely powerful indestructible characteristic, they were able to last for so long in front of the immortal ancestors who held the sage battle halberd. However, at this moment, when they saw the power of the 9 immortal ancestors activating the sage battle halberds with all their might, they immediately did not dare to attack and hurriedly retreated. Are these the weapons left behind by the supreme god of man? It's too powerful. The primordial world has such powerful weapons. Why haven't they used them from the start? I wonder if Kui Hung is their match. The group of heaven-earth saints looked at Kui Hung worriedly. There was no lack of heaven-earth saints who had come back from the present time, so they naturally knew Kui Hung's strength. However, in their opinion, even someone as powerful as Kui Hung was in a very dangerous situation when facing the 9 immortal ancestors wielding sage battle halberds. Although these heaven-earth saints wanted to help, the battle between the two sides had yet to truly begin. If they rashly attacked, they might destroy Kui Hung's arrangements. The best way to deal with this was to be prepared at the side and wait for the opportunity to attack. At this moment, Kui Hung was in a calm state. He stood in the sky with his hands behind his back and looked down calmly at the 9 immortal ancestors rushing towards him. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he chuckled. I didn't expect you to have such evil treasures. The reason why he said that the weapons were evil was because Kui Hung not only felt an extremely vast power from the 9 halberds, he also sensed an extremely terrifying amount of hatred and anger attracted to them. It was as if some will was attached to or suppressed and imprisoned on these sage battle halberds. This powerful will was corroding the body and soul of the owners of the halberds at all times. Even experts at the immortal ancestor realm could not avoid this corrosion. They could only endure the pain and use all their strength to activate the halberd, wanting to kill Kui Hung as soon as possible. In this way, the sage battle halberds could be placed back into the human sacred palace as soon as possible. The longer the battle dragged on, the more dangerous it would be for them. Kui Hung had clearly seen through this. Hence, the moment the sage battle halberds was about to reach him, bright silver water flowed across his body, and his entire body disappeared without a trace from the time spectrum. This was also one of the uses of eon light evasion. It could be used to dodge various techniques, preventing the other party from locking onto him as a target. Boom! The void collapsed, and the river of time raised huge waves. A terrifying roar resounded throughout the ages, affecting all living beings for billions of years to come. The dodging and escaping abilities of eon light evasion were too powerful. After the 9 immortal ancestors waved their halberds, not a single one managed to land on him. They did not even graze him. They only landed on the place where he was originally. 762-33 Layered Black Yellow Pagoda, 2. 762-33 Layered Black Yellow Pagoda, 2. However, this did not make the 9 immortal ancestors feel that they had failed. After their attack missed, they launched an even more ferocious attack on Kui Hung. However, this was still useless. Kui Hung easily dodged the attacks of the 9 immortal ancestors. The incomparably powerful sage battle halberds were still unable to injure a single strand of Kui Hung's hair. While teasing these immortal ancestors, he was also observing the exact situation of the sage battle halberds and the source of these 9 powerful treasures. Especially the strange anger attached to the halberds. Who left behind this will? What was going on? The strength of these halberds has clearly surpassed that of ordinary immortal ancestors. Their essence is also very high. They even contain an extremely special aura that makes even my heart palpitate. Kui Hung dodged the attacks of the 9 immortal ancestors again. His gaze was still on the sage battle halberds. A thought flashed through his mind as he thought to himself, if I'm not wrong, these halberds should have been left behind by the supreme god of man. Their initial use should be to increase the user's strength so that they can empower the users to expel the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Is the will of anger on them left behind by the supreme gods of heaven and earth? That doesn't seem right. Just now, he had also tried to reverse time to look at the origins of the sage battle halberds, but he realized that the halberds were extremely special and their essence was extremely high. He could only reverse time to see a blurry shadow of the past and could not detect clear information at all. It was precisely because of this that he kept dodging around the 9 immortal ancestors. It was to investigate the information about these 9 powerful halberds. After the 9 immortal ancestors repeatedly failed to hit him, they clearly sensed Kui Heng's intentions. Hence, their pursuit stopped. However, the great Tao laws of the primordial world had already been severely injured in the pursuit just now. The primordial world was on the verge of collapse, and countless living beings had died because of it. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng, immortal ancestor Huang Yun, immortal ancestor Yuling, immortal ancestor Hanming, immortal ancestor Luo Qian, and the other immortal ancestors' gazes were all fixed on Kui Heng. Their hearts were filled with unwillingness and anger. Even when they followed the supreme god of man and expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth, they had never felt so aggrieved. Their attacks could not reach the other party at all and they were forced to run in circles around the other party. This was too ridiculous. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng took a step forward and looked straight at Kui Heng. He shouted sternly, "Kui Heng, what exactly do you want?" Immortal ancestor Huang Yun also said in a low voice, "Kui Heng, you're so arrogant and are teasing us. Do you really think that victory is in your grasp? What's the evil aura left on the halberds in your hands?" Kui Heng asked directly. "How about telling me?" He can indeed sense it. Immortal ancestor Hanming shouted sternly, "We can't let this person live. Let's attack with all our might and kill him." The other 8 immortal ancestors' expressions also changed as they nodded. They actually made the aura of the halberd in their hands stronger again, and their connection with each other became stronger. Clearly, Kui Heng's question just now and his previous evaluation of the sage battle halberds as evil treasures made the 9 immortal ancestors very concerned. This might involve a huge secret that they valued greatly. Hence, the 9 immortal ancestors completely did not hold back. They used all their strength and techniques to stimulate the power of the halberds in their hands. They had to kill Kui Heng. They could not let him continue to go back time and explore the secret. Otherwise, there would definitely be a huge problem. Boom! An earth-shattering roar resounded throughout the entire primordial world, causing pieces of the sky to collapse, turning into pitch-black holes that emitted a terrifying destructive aura. At the same time, the 9 halberds had already transformed into 9 pillars of light that pierced through the sky and the ground. An incomparably huge power filled the universe, almost shattering the entire primordial world. At this moment, blood-colored flames began to appear on the bodies of the 9 immortal ancestors, and then the entire void of the primordial world was dyed blood-red. At the core of this blood-colored light was a ball of light that contained endless life power, emitting an aura that symbolizes the source of life and the source of the world. It was the power left behind by the supreme god of man. Under the full strength attack of the 9 immortal ancestors, not only did they begin to burn their bodies and souls, but they also began to activate the power of the divine gifts left behind by the supreme god of man with all their might. All of this was injected into the sage battle halberds, trying their best to increase their power. Die! Die! Roars sounded from the mouths of the 9 immortal ancestors. Endless killing intent condensed into substance and swept across the primordial world that was on the verge of being destroyed. In an instant, 99% of the living beings were destroyed in body and soul. Most of the living beings did not know what had happened before they died and could not react at all. At the same time, the 9 immortal ancestors let out furious roars. The sage battle halberds were slashed down with their full strength, finally successfully locking on to Kui Heng. Kui Heng did not dodge and from the looks of it, the halberds were going to slash him. Seeing this scene, the hearts of the 9 immortal ancestors tensed up. They all looked at the sage battle halberds with extreme anticipation, looking forward to the scene of Kui Heng being killed. In their opinion, the might of the sage battle halberds had already been strengthened to the extreme. Even if it was not comparable to the time when the supreme god of man personally activated the power of the halberds, it was definitely not a problem to kill Kui Heng. However, just as the 9 sage battle halberds were about to slash at Kui Heng, he suddenly pushed his hair gently. Immediately, a strand of black-yellow chi rushed out from the top of his head. This ball of black-yellow chi seemed to have come from the beginning of time. It contained a power that could suppress and stabilize everything. The moment it appeared, it caused the entire primordial world to calm down from the turbulence, making the remaining living beings feel a trace of peace. It was as if as long as this ball of black-yellow chi was around, the world would stabilize and not fall into final destruction. Then, this ball of black-yellow chi moved above Kui Heng's head and condensed into a 33 layers black-yellow pagoda. Every level of this pagoda seemed to contain countless layers of worlds and had endless mysteries. It gave off the feeling that it was simply gathering the primordial world and the chaos sea at the same time. Such a powerful might made the expressions of the 9 immortal ancestors change drastically. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this moment, the void around the 33 layers of the black-yellow pagoda suddenly trembled. It actually slowly spun. Wisps of black-yellow chi surged out of every level of the pagoda and descended, enveloping Kui Heng like a jade necklace. This made Kui Heng look incomparably holy, and a concept appeared in everyone's minds. All evil will be warded off. Myriad dermas will not invade. Boom. It was at this moment that the 9 halberds smashed fiercely onto the 33 layers of the black-yellow pagoda. Immeasurable power was vented on the body of the pagoda. The 9 immortal ancestors immediately focused their attention, hoping to see the scene of this 33-layer black-yellow pagoda being smashed to pieces. It would be acceptable even if it was just smashed away from Kui Heng's head. However, in the end, the 33 layers of the black-yellow pagoda did not move at all. Even the speed at which it spun did not change at all. Even the wisps of black-yellow chi that fell from it were not shaken. At this moment, be it the 9 immortal ancestors or the group of heaven-earth saints, all of them revealed unbelievable expressions and were dumbfounded. How is this possible? 763 Catching immortal ancestors like catching fish. 763 Catching immortal ancestors like catching fish. The sage battle halberds were supreme treasures personally forged by the supreme god of man. Moreover, the materials were found from the original ancient land. They contained a trace of the origin power of everything in the world. They could be said to be the source of all the endless great Tao laws. Therefore, all the great Tao laws in this world would be suppressed by the sage battle halberds. It was difficult to resist the attack of the sage battle halberds, let alone completely defend against it. Even the heaven-earth saints who came from the chaos sea would be suppressed by the sage battle halberds, causing their strength to decrease greatly, and they would be at a disadvantage in the battle with the immortal ancestors. Back then, when the 9 immortal ancestors followed the supreme god of man and expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth, they were in charge of using the sage battle halberds to weaken the strength of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. The effect of the sage battle halberds could be said to have never failed. But now, there was an exception. The 33-layered black-yellow pagoda above Kui Heng's head was actually not affected at all. It was not suppressed at all when it was attacked by the 9 sage battle halberds. It was still undamaged and completely blocked the power of the 9 sage battle halberds. They actually did not have the strength to break through the defense of this 33 layers black-yellow pagoda. There was actually such a powerful defensive technique in the world. This was too illogical and unbelievable. Normally speaking, as long as it was something that came from the source of this world, it should be suppressed by the sage battle halberds. What was Kui Heng's background? What was the origin of his cultivation? How could it be so strange? It was as if it did not belong to this world at all, nor was it based on the original power of this world. There was actually such power. What was going on? The 9 immortal ancestors were filled with shock, unable to understand the current situation. However, their hands did not stop moving. When the attack of the sage battle halberds was blocked by the 33 layers of the black-yellow pagoda, the 9 immortal ancestors launched a second round of attacks. This time, the full power of the primordial world was mobilized from various spacetime dimensions. Together with the power left behind by the supreme god of man, it was all injected into the 9 halberds. At this moment, the sage battle halberds had definitely reached their strongest state since they were refined. Even when they used the weapons to suppress the supreme gods of heaven and earth, they had never been so powerful. After all, although the supreme gods of heaven and earth were strong and their abilities were more unfathomable, the source of their power was still this world. Naturally, they would be suppressed by the sage battle halberds. But Kui Heng was different. His source of power seemed to be completely independent of this world and was completely unaffected by the suppression power of the sage battle halberds. In that case, they could only do their best to increase the power of the sage battle halberds and strive to shatter the 33 layers black-yellow pagoda with pure destructive power. Of course, the 9 immortal ancestors had some schemes when they chose to condense the power of the primordial world and inject it into the sage battle halberds. The power of the primordial world gathered from various spacetime dimensions was not only power itself, but also the many great Tao laws that formed the foundation of its existence. If the power injected into the sage battle halberds was defeated, the primordial world in the many spacetime dimensions would collapse, and the living beings inside would be destroyed in body and soul. In other words, as long as Kui Heng scattered the power condensed in the sage battle halberds, it was equivalent to destroying the primordial world of the various spacetime dimensions, killing all the living beings in the primordial world, and destroying all the civilizations. The 9 immortal ancestors were betting that Kui Heng would not be so ruthless and be so heartless. Such an action naturally could not be hidden from the group of heaven-earth saints. They looked at the 9 immortal ancestors in disbelief, as if they were looking at a group of monsters. "Are you crazy? Are you trying to destroy the primordial world and the chaos sea? I didn't expect that as the rulers of the primordial world and known as immortal ancestors, you could actually do such a despicable thing. Dao brother Kui Heng, be careful. The sage battle halberds contains the source of the primordial world of the various spacetime dimensions. If the power inside is destroyed, the primordial world of the various spacetime dimensions will also be destroyed. If the primordial world is destroyed, the boundless chaos sea will also be affected. More than 90% of the universe will be destroyed." The group of heaven-earth saints explained the situation to Kui Heng. However, they had no choice at the moment. They could only remind Kui Heng not to completely disperse the power in the sage battle halberds. The primordial world and the boundless chaos sea both had the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods. If they were destroyed because of Kui Heng, it would definitely trigger a backlash from the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods. Even though this was no longer the power of the 3 supreme gods when they were complete, the power contained in it was definitely still powerful enough to sweep through any immortal ancestor-level figure. Although the strength Kui Heng had displayed had already suppressed the 9 immortal ancestors, no one felt that he could be compared to the 3 supreme gods. Therefore, in the eyes of this group of heaven-earth saints, Kui Heng would definitely not be able to withstand the backlash of the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods. It was not easy for an expert of this level to appear, and his strength was so terrifying. They did not want Kui Heng to die just like that. At this moment, the 9 immortal ancestors' faces were filled with killing intent as they stared fixedly at Kui Heng. They had no intention of stopping at all. To them, be it the living beings in the primordial world or the living beings in the boundless chaos sea, they were small existences that were like illusions. They were not worth mentioning at all. As long as they could kill a peerless enemy like Kui Heng, they would do it at all costs. Even if the price was the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea, they did not care. Even if the primordial world was destroyed, they could still open up a new world and recreate the elements of earth, water, wind, fire, etc., creating endless living beings and nurture immortal emperors one after another. Compared to now, it was almost no different. They might even be more free and unrestrained. Under such determination, the 9 halberds smashed into the 33 layers black-yellow pagoda again. 764 Catching immortal ancestors like catching fish, 2. 764 Catching immortal ancestors like catching fish, 2. Die. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng roared angrily, "No matter how powerful your abilities are, can you resist the power of the primordial world gathered from endless space and time? You're the only one who can make us form such an attack with the sage battle halberds." Immortal ancestor Huang Yun appeared high and mighty as he looked down at Kui Heng. "You should feel honored." Immortal ancestor Zhongmu, who was supposed to be dead in the future, was still alive at this time point. He already knew about his future death and was filled with killing intent towards Kui Heng. "Outer Dao cultivator of unknown origin, you will definitely die today," Immortal ancestor Zhongmu said in a low voice. He was most concerned about Kui Heng's power characteristics. This power that was completely not suppressed by the sage battle halberds was filled with too many variables, making it difficult to figure out. He had to kill this person as soon as possible. Otherwise, there would definitely be endless trouble in the future. Boom! An incomparably shocking force erupted, causing the entire primordial world to tremble. There were even waves of aftershock that dissipated into the chaos sea outside the primordial world, instantly destroying countless universes and destroying countless lives. However, even with such powerful might, when it landed on the black-yellow pagoda, it did not shake at all. It only made the black-yellow qi that hung around it tremble slightly. As for Kui Heng, who was standing under the black-yellow pagoda, he was naturally unharmed. However, Shu Cheng, Huang Yun, Zhong Mu, and the other immortal ancestors did not seem to be surprised by this outcome. Their faces even revealed some anticipation. That was because after the power of the sage battle halberds erupted, if it was completely blocked, a large portion of the power that erupted would be reflected back to the halberds. The sage battle halberds were personally forged by the supreme god of man, and the materials were from the original ancient land. Its essence was extremely high, so it would naturally not be destroyed by this recoil. In this way, the portion of the rebound power would be scattered by the sage battle halberds. This was equivalent to the destruction of countless spacetime dimensions. All of this was because Kui Heng had reflected this power back. Although the root of the problem should be the actions of the 9 immortal ancestors who had used the sage battle halberds to gather the power of the primordial world of various spacetime dimensions, because of the special nature of the sage battle halberds and their own uniqueness, they would not suffer a backlash. The sage battle halberds contained the original source power. In essence, it came from the same source as the power of the 3 supreme gods. Even if this power shattered the primordial world, there would be no backlash. The source of the power of the 9 immortal ancestors was the gift left behind by the supreme god of man, so they naturally would not suffer a backlash from the supreme god of man. They cultivated the great Tao laws that the supreme gods of heaven and earth had created when they were in the primordial world. Moreover, they had already reached the peak of perfection, so they naturally would not suffer the backlash of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Kui Heng's strength seemed to have originated from another world. It was unrelated to the great Tao laws of this world. He was simply like an invader who had sneaked in from an unfamiliar world. As long as the backlash power of the 3 supreme gods appeared, he would definitely be the priority target. There would definitely be no accidents. At this moment, the power unleashed by the sage battle halberds had completely dissipated. The endless great Tao laws began to emit a soul-shaking sorrow, as if they were about to fall into final destruction. The backlash of the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods is about to descend. A cold smile appeared on immortal ancestor Shu Cheng's face. He looked at Kui Heng, who was standing under the black-yellow pagoda. He's going to die soon. The situation doesn't seem right. Immortal ancestor Huang Yun frowned. He looked at the primordial world below and sensed the power dissipating in the void. He said in surprise, "How is this possible?" At the same time, the other immortal ancestors also looked at the primordial world below in extreme shock, almost unable to believe their eyes and perception. How can this be? The expression of immortal ancestor Shu Cheng changed. He realized that there was no change in the primordial world at all. There were no signs of destruction. The great Tao laws that had just let out a sorrowful cry, as if they were about to fall into final destruction, had also returned to their original state. Moreover, it was not just the primordial world of this time point. The primordial world of the other time points was the same. It was stable and calm, and there was not even the slightest turbulence. They were not affected at all. This also meant that the plans of the 9 immortal ancestors had completely failed. The backlash from the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods would not appear now. Their confrontation with Kui Heng had completely failed. The Heaven-Earth Saints who were originally worried about Kui Heng were already dumbfounded. The strength Kui Heng displayed once again exceeded their understanding. With such terrifying strength, even if he had yet to reach the level of the 3 supreme gods, he had already completely surpassed all the immortal ancestors. What was the background of such an expert? How was he born? Doubts appeared in their hearts one after another. At this moment, the group of Heaven-Earth Saints no longer thought that Kui Heng had reached this realm through cultivation. After all, whether it was the immortal ancestor realm or the Heaven-Earth Saint realm, it was not something that could be reached by pure cultivation. One had to obtain the power left behind by the 3 supreme gods. The 3 supreme gods were existences similar to illusory concepts. It was the same for the 2 creators, beginning and end. It was impossible to reach this level by relying on any cultivation method. Could it be that Kui Heng really came from an unknown place? In the legendary void, were there other worlds besides the one created by the beginning and end? Kui Heng did not care about the bewildered gazes of the Heaven-Earth Saints. He was still staring at the 9 immortal ancestors and said indifferently, "You guys attacked with all your might just now. You must have enjoyed yourselves very much. Now, it should be my turn, right?" These simple words made the souls of the 9 immortal ancestors tremble. Without thinking, they began to escape into the river of time. In the blink of an eye, the 9 immortal ancestors disappeared. However, Kui Heng did not pursue them. With his current cultivation, dealing with the 9 immortal ancestors was as easy as flipping his hand. Moreover, after completely blocking the attacks of the 9 sage battle halberds, his Dao mark in this time point had already begun to stabilize. Soon, he could go back in time and occupy this timeline. This also increased his strength. Therefore, even if the 9 immortal ancestors had already escaped, Kui Heng was not in a hurry. He only stood in this time point and gently raised his right hand to draw a few times in the air. Immediately, several immortal binding ropes appeared. Then, these immortal binding ropes intertwined into a net and flew into the river of time. As though he was fishing with a net, the 9 immortal ancestors were pulled out of the river of time one after the other. None of them could escape, and they were all firmly imprisoned in the net, unable to move at all. This deep sense of powerlessness made the 9 immortal ancestors experience unprecedented despair. In this situation, Kui Heng could already kill them all. Kui Heng slowly walked over and looked down at the 9 immortal ancestors imprisoned by the immortal binding net. He chuckled and said, "What do you think I should do with you?" 765 Resurrection of the Supreme God of Man. 765 Resurrection of the Supreme God of Man. The moment Kui Heng imprisoned the 9 immortal ancestors, the Dao mark of this time point completely condensed. When he arrived in front of the 9 immortal ancestors to question them, he had actually already begun to rewind time, preparing to occupy this timeline. With Kui Heng's current strength, this was very easy. With his cultivation realm, he could completely do all kinds of things at the same time. Therefore, in the eyes of the 9 immortal ancestors, Kui Heng's figure had already started overlapping, as if he was fusing with countless spacetime dimensions. His entire body emitted an extremely mysterious aura of time. After sensing the aura of time on Kui Heng's body, they could not help but feel dense fear. "You, who exactly are you? How can you interweave so much time power? What's going on? What kind of strength is this? How can there be such a powerful ability in this world?" Immortal Ancestor Shu Cheng and Immortal Ancestor Huang Yun couldn't help but be shocked and shout in disbelief. At this moment, the time aura emitted by Kui Heng was already powerful to an incomprehensible level. The group of Heaven-Earth Saints were also inexplicably shocked when they saw the overlapping effects of time on Kui Heng. This was too powerful. They really did not know how he reached this realm. Cultivation? Could one really reach this realm with just cultivation? What kind of cultivation method was this? Was it possible to reach the realm of the three supreme gods through cultivation, or even the realm of the beginning and end? This was too unbelievable. It was impossible for such a thing to happen. Actually, Kui Heng's current state was not normal. Under normal circumstances, late-stage return to void cultivators would stand outside the river of time. They would not be corroded by the power of time, and their bodies would not be intertwined with too much time power. However, Kui Heng was currently occupying the timeline, so this was different. His occupation of the timeline was not only on a single level of time, but also on a spatial level through his fake selves. This was to reach the space-time level. This caused Kui Heng's condition to be special when he occupied the timeline. A huge amount of time power would appear on his body, giving the 9 immortal ancestors the feeling that the river of time had descended. Therefore, facing such a powerful Kui Heng, even the 2 strongest ancestors, Shu Cheng and Huang Yun, lowered their heads and stopped talking. There was no need to mention the other ancestors. They all felt that the current Kui Heng was incomparably terrifying, causing them to lose all thoughts of resisting and completely give up struggling. Of course, there could be accidents at any time. Just as all the immortal ancestors lowered their heads and remained silent. Immortal ancestor Zhongmu suddenly said to Kui Heng, "We're not your match. No matter what you want to do with us, it's up to you. However, I have a question." "Speak." Kui Heng nodded slightly and smiled. It's rumored that immortal ancestor Zhongmu's eyes are special. You can see the uncertain future and the mysteries hidden in the spatial rift. You specially asked, so you must have seen something. Is there another world outside the Chaos Sea? Immortal ancestor Zhongmu stared fixedly at Kui Heng and said in a low voice, "I once saw that your origin of life did not come from the divine nature of the supreme god of man. Now, I see that the source of your power doesn't come from the origin chi as well. The sage battle halberds can't restrain you, and the divine power of the supreme god of man can't suppress you. Are you from another world? Other worlds?" Kui Heng's eyes narrowed slightly. Instead of answering, he asked, "Who told you that there are other worlds?" He actually wanted to figure this out so that he could confirm if Earth was in that so-called other world. Kui Heng had always been brooding over the fact that he could not locate the time period when he lived on Earth. It might also cause obstacles for his future cultivation. If he could use this opportunity to figure it out, it would definitely be a pleasant surprise. "No one told me. It's just that my eyes are a little special and I can see more." Immortal ancestor Zhongmu closed his eyes and said indifferently, "Do it. In any case, you've already killed me once." As he spoke, he let go of the halberd in his hand and placed the supreme treasure on the ground to show that he had given up resisting. After the other 8 immortal ancestors heard immortal ancestor Zhongmu's words, they looked at the sage battle halberd on the ground and hesitated for a moment. In the end, they put down their sage battle halberds and gave up resisting as well. Of course, the main reason for giving up on resisting was because they knew that it was useless even if they resisted. It was better to take the initiative to give up. Perhaps there would be a chance of survival. If they continued to resist, they might really die in this space-time dimension. Do you really want to continue going forward and go back to an even more ancient past? At this moment, immortal ancestor Shu Cheng spoke. He looked at Kui Heng and said in a low voice, "That is not a good choice. If you go back to the era when the 3 supreme gods were still around, they will definitely kill you." Immortal ancestor Huang Yun also said. The other immortal ancestors were also silent. They were all a little nervous now. After all, what might happen next was a huge gamble for them. Kui Heng might be killed, or they might die on the spot. Under such emotions, they were naturally not in the mood to speak. Only immortal ancestor Shu Cheng and immortal ancestor Huang Yun were still in the mood to persuade Kui Heng, but this was actually just stalling for time. This power that had been silent for thousands of years was not easy to condense. It would definitely take a lot of time. Kui Heng's gaze landed on immortal ancestor Shu Cheng and immortal ancestor Huang Yun. He smiled and said, "Ever since the 3 supreme gods transformed into the Tao, countless years have passed." 766 Resurrection of the Supreme God of Man? 2. 766 Resurrection of the Supreme God of Man. 2. Other than you, no one else survived from that era. The exact story regarding the three supreme gods is only your version. If you don't believe me, you can continue going back in time and take a look. Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng sneered. Although you're powerful, you're still far from the level of the three supreme gods. If you use the power left behind by the supreme god of man to estimate the strength of the supreme god of man, you'll be very wrong, immortal ancestor Huang Yun said indifferently. You'll regret it. Oh. Kui Heng frowned slightly when he heard that. His gaze landed on the 9 sage battle halberds on the ground. Suddenly, he looked at immortal ancestor Shu Cheng and the others and said with a smile, "Are you stalling for time to recover the power in these halberds?" Actually, from the beginning, he had realized that the state of these 9 halberds was abnormal. After these sage battle halberds had left the hands of the 9 immortal ancestors, the power inside suddenly became restless, as if some restraint had been undone. Of course, this restless power was actually only inside the sage battle halberds and was not revealed. The essence of the halberds were extremely high. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for anyone to sense the situation inside. However, under the cover of Kui Heng's essence soul perception, it was naturally impossible for such power fluctuations to hide from Kui Heng. Even the characteristics of this power were clearly investigated. Is the interior of these sage battle halberds also filled with the power left behind by the supreme god of man? Kui Heng stared at the 2 immortal ancestors, Shu Cheng and Huang Yun, and said with a smile, "Are you trying to use the sage battle halberds as a carrier to gather the power left behind by the supreme god of man again?" Immortal ancestor Shu Cheng and immortal ancestor Huang Yun were speechless and did not know what to say. Kui Heng could actually sense the changes in the halberds. How did this happen? What level had he reached? Boom. At this moment, countless voids suddenly trembled. A faint feeling appeared in the hearts of all the living beings and they could not help but look up. Whether it was the primordial world or the boundless chaos universe, as long as they were still alive, they had a feeling that an incomparably great existence was reviving. This existence symbolized the source of all life and was also one of the first life forms. Only Kui Heng did not feel anything. That was because the source of his life did not come from the divine nature of the supreme god of man. Of course, with Kui Heng's current cultivation realm, he could clearly sense how powerful this resurrection power was. Is this the awakening of the supreme god of man? Kui Heng's eyes narrowed slightly as his gaze landed on the 9 halberds. He thought to himself, it doesn't seem like it. The reason why he did not stop the powers in the sage battle halberd from gathering was because he sensed that the aura of this power was very similar to the gift left behind by the supreme god of man. However, this power was very obvious and incomplete. Moreover, it contained the anger and resentment he had sensed earlier. This was not a normal power, nor was it complete. Therefore, although the power contained in the 9 sage battle halberds was powerful, it had not exceeded the limit of what he could deal with now. He could take this opportunity to investigate the power that the supreme god of man might possess. After all, as long as he continued cultivating, he would definitely go back in time and occupy the remaining timeline. At that time, there would inevitably be conflicts. It would be good to understand the situation in advance. Buzz. 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 At this moment, the 9 sage battle halberds that were originally placed on the ground had already floated up, emitting subtle trembling sounds that affected all living beings other than Kui Heng. The 9 halberds formed a circle in the air, and the power contained in them pointed towards the center of the circle. These powers were interconnected and fused with each other. Soon, they formed a whole and condensed into the outline of a human. Although it was only an outline, it still emitted an incomparably huge pressure and aura. The moment this human-shaped outline appeared, the 9 immortal ancestors knelt on the ground. The group of heaven-earth saints also knelt, and all the living beings in the primordial world and the boundless chaos universe knelt on the ground. All of this came from the aura emitted by the human-shaped outline. It symbolizes the source of life and the highest essence, the aura of the supreme god of man. As long as they were living beings of this world, the source of their life would be the supreme god of man. Even if they did not know anything, their bodies and souls still retained their instincts. Now that the human-shaped outline with a holy aura had appeared, it naturally caused all living beings to kneel down to him. This was all instinct. Only Kui Heng was different. He showed no signs of kneeling to the human figure. He did not even look like he was bowing. Instead, he sized up this human-shaped outline that contained the aura of the supreme god of man, his eyes filled with scrutiny. As expected, it's in an incomplete state. There's also great resentment and anger, but this is indeed the divine power of the supreme god of man. Kui Heng frowned slightly. What did the supreme god of man experience back then? He actually left such negative power in the sage battle halberds. Boom! Suddenly, a loud bang that sounded like the sky was collapsing came. The human-shaped outline suddenly flew up. The 9 halberds were also wrapped around its body, as if they had completely become a part of this human-shaped outline. In an instant, all the great Tao laws related to life in the primordial world and the chaos sea were triggered. They gathered in an instant and surged towards Kui Heng. The great Tao laws related to life were triggered, causing the life force of all living beings to be mobilized. This was actually equivalent to using the life force of all the living beings in the primordial world and the chaos sea to suppress Kui Heng's life essence. This was to weaken Kui Heng's life level and reduce his strength. However, this was useless against Kui Heng, who had the black-yellow pagoda protecting him. Whether it was the huge life force suppression or the 9 halberds that followed closely behind, they could not cause any damage to Kui Heng. In fact, because of the extremely powerful stabilizing ability of the black-yellow pagoda, after these attacks were blocked, they could not cause any damage to the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea. It was like a clay ox entering the sea, directly eliminated. Die, die, die. The human-shaped figure suddenly opened its mouth and let out an angry roar. The power in its entire body began to become even more manic. At the same time, the 9 halberds around it began to spin rapidly, and every halberd lit up with an incomparably dazzling light. It was as if he wanted to use everything he had to attack Kui Heng again. Such madness and temper. This doesn't seem like the holiness of a supreme god of man who symbolizes life. I want to see what you are. Kui Heng stared at the human-shaped outline. He suddenly raised his right hand and formed a sword that pointed to the sky. In an instant, a purple-gold sword light burst out. This sword light contained an incomparably profound charm, as if it was the source of all laws. It covered everything and even created and destroyed all things. Tao Life Sword. There was no roar, no sword cry. In silence, this sword light instantly crossed space and covered everything at this time point, leaving the human-shaped outline with nowhere to escape or dodge. Clang! After being struck by the Tao Life Sword, the human-shaped outline actually let out a sound like metal clashing. Immediately after, it actually split into 9 pieces on the spot and fell down. 767 The time before the immortal ancestors were born. 767 The time before the immortal ancestors were born. After the human-shaped outline was defeated by the Tao Life Sword, 9 bright lights scattered into the air. At this moment, all the living beings in the primordial world and the chaos sea felt as if they had suffered a calamity. It was as if their closest kin had been beaten senseless. They could not help but feel anger and sorrow in their hearts. However, this feeling was only a momentary illusion. As long as one's cultivation realm reached a certain level, they would quickly wake up. However, after waking up, they felt an unprecedented shock. The human-shaped outline that contained the divine power of the supreme god of man was actually shattered and slashed into pieces by Kui Heng's sword. In the end, it even scattered into 9 pieces and fell. What kind of power was this? Especially the heaven-earth saints who were in the battle, they could not help but suspect that there was something wrong with their perception. The human-shaped outline was actually scattered just like that. There was not even any process of resistance. It was simply crushed like an ordinary stone. Although this group of heaven-earth saints had long known that Kui Heng was very powerful, they did not expect him to be so powerful. The human-shaped figure had gathered the divine power left behind by the 9 halberds. Compared to the level of the immortal ancestors, his strength was already countless times stronger. But it was actually shattered so easily. What kind of power could achieve this? What kind of technique was that purple-gold sword light? It was too powerful. The Heaven-Earth Saints were extremely shocked. The power of the Tao Life Sword was too unbelievable for them. It was simply illogically powerful. However, after the human-shaped outline was defeated, why was it scattered into 9 parts? What did these 9 parts contain? Although all the Heaven-Earth Saints were very curious, no one dared to intercept the 9 portions of light at this time. If they offended Kui Heng because of this, it would be too unjust a death. At this moment, the 9 immortal ancestors looked at the sky with their mouths agape in disbelief. To them, this was too shocking. It was simply unbelievable. Unlike the Heaven-Earth Saints, the 9 immortal ancestors knew very well what the true origin of the human-shaped outline was, and they also knew what level of strength it could reach. It was equivalent to a part of the supreme God of man. It was actually scattered just like that. Moreover, it was scattered into 9 portions. This meant that some secrets might be exposed. This was something they could not tolerate. It was also something they had been trying their best to hide since ancient times. Immortal Ancestor Shu Cheng, Immortal Ancestor Huang Yun, and the others struggled with all their might, trying to break free from the restraints of the immortal binding net and intercept the 9 lights. They could not let the secret hidden within the 9 lights be discovered. However, the imprisonment power of the immortal binding net was extremely powerful. This was an immortal technique that could even imprison space. Even the combined efforts of the 9 immortal ancestors could not break free from it at all. Hence, the 9 immortal ancestors could only watch helplessly as Kui Heng raised his hand and waved it in the air. The 9 lights scattered by the human figure landed in his palms. Then, the light slowly dissipated, and the things inside appeared. When the 9 immortal ancestors saw this scene, they felt dizzy. Their hearts surged with powerlessness and despair. Of course, they were also extremely angry. One of their biggest secrets, and also one of the biggest secrets in the history of the primordial world, was about to be known by Kui Heng. And they were powerless to stop it. They could only watch helplessly. Kui Heng raised his hand and took the 9 lights into his palm. They felt cold to the touch, as if 9 small ice cubes had landed in his palm. At this moment, the dazzling light had already dissipated, revealing 9 body parts that emitted a faint cold aura. That's right, they were body parts. What was in the 9 lights was not some kind of treasure. Instead, they were body parts. There were the facial features of a face and some internal organs. Eyeballs, ears, tongue, arms, legs, heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys. Each body part contained extremely dense power. It was as if they were dug out from the supreme God of man's body. Moreover, Kui Heng could clearly feel that the power contained in these organs was extremely similar to the supreme God of man's divine power left behind in the bodies of the 9 immortal ancestors. It could be said to be from the same source. What was going on? The supreme God of man had been dismembered. The so-called gift left behind by the supreme God of man was actually dug out from the corpses of the supreme God of man? Such a thing could happen? If that was the case, was there something wrong with the so-called Tao transformation? One doubt after another appeared in Kui Heng's mind. Then, he put away the body parts and looked at the 9 immortal ancestors. He said in a low voice, "What's going on? You know what I'm asking." The 9 immortal ancestors were all silent. No one spoke. Seeing that they were all silent, Kui Heng continued, "The so-called gifts left behind by the supreme God of man are actually body parts dug out from the supreme God of man's body. You used the halberd to consume the supreme God of man? Was this the reason why you tried to dissuade me from continuing to go back to an even more ancient time point? Are you afraid that I will find out what you've done? So what if I am?" Immortal Ancestor Zhongmu sneered and said, "If you want to know more about the situation, you can continue going back in time. As long as you reach that time point, you will naturally know all the secrets." "He can't go back further," Immortal Ancestor Shu Cheng hurriedly said. "It's fine if he knows these secrets, but if he really returns to that time, we'll be completely destroyed. At this point, what's the difference between our situation and complete destruction?" Immortal Ancestor Zhongmu said calmly, "Let him relive that time himself." 768 The time before the immortal ancestors were born, 2. 768 The time before the immortal ancestors were born, 2. Don't worry, I won't easily touch on dangerous and unknown history. At this moment, Kui Heng suddenly pulled immortal ancestor Zhongmu into the air and bound him with an immortal binding rope. He chuckled and said, however, I can make preparations to touch on that history. Before his words landed on immortal ancestor Zhongmu's ears, his body lit up with purple gold light. The light was sharp, as if it had the intention to split the world apart and envelope him entirely. Dao Life Sword. Streaks of purple gold sword lights instantly obliterated immortal ancestor Zhongmu's figure from this time point, leaving only a ball of light left behind by the supreme god of man floating in the air. At the same time, with this time point as the starting point, as long as the timeline was occupied by Kui Heng, immortal ancestor Zhongmu would be dead and no longer exist. However, this was not the end. After Kui Heng destroyed immortal ancestor Zhongmu on the timeline, he continued to attack his past selves as well. He was not going back in time. He only sent an incarnation of a Dao mark into the past from the time of the first chaos calamity. Then, Kui Heng's perception followed the trajectory of time that had been rewinded earlier and arrived at the time when immortal ancestor Zhongmu had just accommodated the divine remains of the supreme god of man. This was the time of the birth of the Gate Master Immortal Emperor. Crossing the river of time, Kui Heng once again saw the 9 immortal ancestors surrounding a ball of light and heard their conversation. At this moment, the former Kui Heng had just escaped from the attack of immortal ancestor Zhongmu. Beside the ball of light left behind by the supreme god of man, immortal ancestor Zhongmu's face revealed a stunned and puzzled expression. He said in surprise, "How can this be? Even if he's already dead in the distant future, as long as he exists, we should be able to find him." Xu Cheng, Huang Yun, Yu Ling, and the other immortal ancestors noticed that something was wrong with immortal ancestor Zhongmu's expression and hurriedly came over to ask, "How is it? Did you find him? How many years ago did this person come from? What's his background? Did you kill him?" Immortal ancestor Zhongmu was about to reply when his expression suddenly turned cold. His face revealed fear as he said in shock, "No, that's not right. His." Before he could finish speaking, Kui Heng's incarnation's attack had already crossed the river of time. A ball of pitch-black light condensed into a treasure mirror in the air. The light that seemed to symbolize the source of death instantly enveloped immortal ancestor Zhongmu. Yin-Yang Seal. This immortal cultivation technique had fused yin and yang and could display various opposing powers, such as positive and negative, life and death. What it displayed now was the power of death. Now, Kui Heng was countless times stronger than when he had just broken through to the late-stage return to Void Realm. Even if he had yet to occupy this time point, the incarnation of the Dao mark alone was enough to condense the power to kill immortal ancestor Zhongmu. Under the illumination of this pitch-black mirror light, immortal ancestor Zhongmu had no ability to resist at all. All his vitality was destroyed on the spot, and his body and soul was destroyed. Only a ball of bright light was left floating on the spot. It was the ball of power left behind by the supreme god of man. Then, this ball of light flew up and entered the river of time, landing in the hand of Kui Heng. On the time spectrum, from this moment onwards, this ball of divine power was already in Kui Heng's hands. It was the same in the future. Immortal ancestor Zhongmu had ceased to exist. At this moment, the other 8 immortal ancestors did not even react to what was going on. After the ball of light left behind by the supreme god of man was taken away by Kui Heng's incarnation, it took them a long time to react to what had just happened. It was really because Kui Heng's attack just now was too sudden and powerful, completely exceeding the understanding of the 8 immortal ancestors. But they could do nothing but watch helplessly. After killing immortal ancestor Zhongmu, Kui Heng sent an incarnation of a Dao mark to an earlier time. At this moment, the 9 immortal ancestors were about to begin to accommodate the power left behind by the supreme god of man. It was the time before they became immortal ancestors. Whether it was the 9 immortal ancestors, the Heaven-Earth Saints, or other immortal emperors, they could not return to this time point. Therefore, as soon as Kui Heng's incarnation arrived at this time point, he could clearly feel that it was different. The river of time in this era was incomparably calm and natural. There were no signs of being modified. The timeline was simple, clear, clean, and refreshing. To Kui Heng, who had already seen an incomparably chaotic timeline and space-time fluctuations, coming to this era was simply like coming from a smelly ditch to a clear spring. It was simply refreshing. However, after Kui Heng finished appreciating the view, he focused his attention on the goal this time, which was immortal ancestor Zhongmu. At this moment, in front of the human sacred palace, the door opened and 9 people slowly walked out. They were the 9 immortal ancestors who had yet to attain the Tao. Their footsteps were heavy and their expressions were serious. Their hands were trembling, as if they had just done something that made them extremely uneasy. These 9 people were all holding a ball of light in their hands. The lights emitted an extremely dense power of the supreme god of man, but there was also an aura of mania and anger. This time, we risked our lives and finally obtained the possibility to step into a higher realm. Huang Yun looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "But we can't let anyone else know about what happened today. From now on, this matter will be sealed forever. No one else will know." Xu Cheng nodded. "This is a secret we share. These are all gifts left behind by the supreme god of man," Chang Mu said seriously. After the supreme god of man transformed into the Tao, he left behind 12 gifts. 9 of them are for us, and the other 3 are for all living beings. This will be the established history. That's right. We're all successors of the supreme god of man's divine power. Immortal ancestor Luo Qian nodded, as if he was stating something incomparably right. Yes. Huang Yun nodded and said in a low voice, "In the future, this established history has to be engraved in our own understanding. Even if there's no one else around, we have to live and breathe this truth." That's right. Xu Cheng nodded in agreement and said, "In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, we should accommodate these few gifts as soon as possible to prevent the situation that happened to the first 3 people." The others nodded and began to absorb the light in their hands. Zhongmu was naturally among these people. But just as he was about to refine the ball of light in his hand, a slender white palm suddenly stretched out from the void and grabbed the ball of light, snatching it away and disappearing. He was left stunned on the spot as he looked at his empty hands in disbelief. What's going on? What just happened? Who was it? Then, another teasing voice floated over and chuckled. "I'm sorry, I forgot to kill you." The palm that had just disappeared appeared again and slapped down. Boom. With this loud bang, immortal ancestor Zhongmu, who had stood at the top of the world for countless years in the future, was destroyed in body and soul and completely disappeared from history. The timeline immediately underwent a series of changes. The 9 immortal ancestors that had been famous since ancient times was changed to the 8 immortal ancestors. The way these 8 immortal ancestors acted had also changed. Clearly, this matter had a deep impact on them. However, this was no longer Kui Heng's concern. At this moment, this gift left behind by the supreme god of man completely belonged to him. There were no longer any obstacles in the path ahead. Of course, before he really touched that period of history, Kui Heng still had to confirm what had happened to the supreme god of man. Hence, he looked at the 8 terrified people at the side. "How did you get the balls of light in your hands?" 769 I am the ancestor of all living beings. 769 I am the ancestor of all living beings. The immortal ancestors' achievements came from refining and accommodating the divine gifts of the supreme god of man. Therefore, the timeline occupied by the immortal ancestors also began from the moment they became immortal ancestors. The timeline behind that was impossible for them to occupy and reverse. The future 8 immortal ancestors who knew Kui Heng could not be unified with their past selves at this time point. This also meant that they did not know Kui Heng, who had suddenly appeared here, snatched away the gift left behind by the supreme god of man, and killed Zhongmu. However, the strength Kui Heng displayed when he killed Zhongmu just now terrified them. Of course, what terrified them even more was the timing that Kui Heng had appeared, this place, and the question Kui Heng raised. This expert who had appeared out of thin air had effortlessly killed a peer of the same level as them and even asked them about the supreme god of man. This made it difficult for them not to make some connections, and it also made them feel extremely puzzled. The supreme gods of heaven and earth had already been expelled from the primordial world and turned into the chaos sea. The supreme god of man had also fallen into an extremely strange state. The 9 of them should be the strongest existences in the world right now. It was impossible for anyone to be stronger than the 9 of them. Who was this person who had suddenly appeared? How could he have such powerful strength? As the oldest and strongest among the 8, Huang Yun took the initiative to step forward and ask, "I can answer your doubts, but we also want to know where you came from." Facing an expert who could kill Zhongmu so easily, he knew very well that it was impossible for them to resist. Instead of waiting for death and being killed without knowing anything, it was better to ask clearly so that they could die knowing why they died. Even if the other party was unwilling to answer, he had already done what he wanted to do. There would be fewer regrets. Oh! Kui Heng's gaze landed on Huang Yun and he chuckled. The current you is much stronger than the future you. You actually dare to ask me questions. At this moment, Huang Yun was a little different from the immortal ancestor Huang Yun of the future. He was clearly more courageous now. Future. Huang Yun was stunned when he heard that. Then, he asked in surprise and nervousness, "You're from the future. Are the few of us still around in the future?" Although he had led a few people to obtain the supreme god of man's gifts and obtained a chance to step into a higher realm, he had always felt a little uneasy. He felt that they would suffer retribution and die an unnatural death in the future. "You're all around. It's just that Zhongmu has died in my hands." Kui Heng smiled and said, "In the future, you'll be immortal ancestors who stand above all living beings. Unfortunately, you wanted to kill me, thus the situation now." As soon as these words were spoken, Huang Yun and the other 7 people's expressions changed, and they could not hide their fear. So this was their future enemy, but he had actually returned to this time point from the future. Wasn't this something that only a supreme god could do? In the era where the 3 supreme gods were present, only these 3 could touch the mysteries of time. Even if others cultivated to the point where their strength surpassed the perfected immortal emperor realm in the future, they could only comprehend the mysteries of time and could not cross time to attack. Although the 3 supreme gods were no longer around, it had only been a short period of time after all. They had yet to try, so they naturally did not understand the situation in this aspect. Moreover, even if their future selves could occupy the timeline and attack the past, there was no way they could attack like Kui Heng. This was the situation with the immortal ancestors. The reason why the timeline they occupied was so long was because they were born in a very ancient past. Although Heaven-Earth Saints could reverse the timeline back to before they were born, this was also relying on the power left behind by the supreme gods of heaven and earth. At most, they could go back in time as far as when the supreme gods of heaven and earth transformed into the Tao. It was impossible to go further than that. However, to Huang Yun and the others of this era, Kui Heng's method of descending from the future was really unbelievable. This also made them understand that it was impossible for them to resist at all. Just like when they were facing the supreme gods at their peak, they were extremely small and weak. "Are you here for the matter of the supreme god of man? Do you want to kill us?" Huang Yun said dejectedly. "If that's the case, we can be considered to have suffered retribution." Kui Heng did not answer him. Instead, he continued to ask, "What did you do to the supreme god of man?" Huang Yun took a deep breath and sighed softly. "We've committed grave sins. When the supreme god of man was in a strange and powerless state, we used the power of the sage battle halberds to suppress him and dug out a portion of his body, wanting to use this to break through. A portion of the body were dug out." Kui Heng stared at Huang Yun and asked in a low voice, "Is it the 9 parts of the eyes, ears, tongue, arms, legs, heart, lungs, liver, and kidney? There's also his blood, bone marrow, and brain." Huang Yun's face was already a little pale. He lowered his head and said, "It's just that the spirituality contained in these 3 parts is too strong. They escaped on their own and have already disappeared. With your strength, how could you suppress the supreme god of man?" Kui Heng frowned. Although these immortal ancestors who had yet to attain the Tao were far stronger than ordinary perfected immortal emperors, they were still a long way from reaching the immortal ancestor realm. How could they suppress the supreme god of man? No matter how bad the supreme god of man's state was or how weak he was, as long as he could still move, it was impossible for him to be suppressed by a few people who had not even reached the immortal ancestor realm. Even if the power of the sage battle halberds were added into the equation, it was impossible. At this relatively high level, even if one's realm was just a little weaker, their performance in terms of strength was worlds apart. There was no comparison. Unless the supreme god of man had really encountered something unexpected and could not move, leaving him at the mercy of others. However, according to the legends of creation, the three supreme gods were the rulers after the disappearance of the beginning and end. There was no existence stronger than them. 770 I am the ancestor of all living beings. 2. 770 I am the ancestor of all living beings. 2. In this era, the supreme gods of heaven and earth had already been expelled from the primordial world. Who else could make the supreme god of man fall into such a state of immobility? Or is it that the history of creation that I know is not complete and is fake? Kui Heng thought to himself, feeling very puzzled. At this moment, Huang Yun explained, with our strength, it's naturally impossible for us to suppress the supreme god of man. However, ever since the supreme gods of heaven and earth were expelled, the supreme god of man has fallen into a strange state. He often fell asleep. At first, he slept for 10,000 years, but later on, the time became longer and longer. In the recent tens of millions of years, he only woke up for a short 100 years. We also discovered that when the supreme god of man fell asleep, it was as if he had become a powerless living being. He was no different from an ordinary person and was simply unable to withstand a single blow. After a few moments of hesitation, we finally made up our minds. We took the risk to use the supreme god of man battle halberd to suppress him and took away a portion of his body parts, wanting to use it to advance to a higher realm. He often sleeps and falls into an extremely weak state. Kui Heng frowned slightly. This situation was really incomprehensible. The supreme god of man is a peak existence who created the concept of living beings. What kind of power could make him fall into such a strange state? Such a strange state made even him feel afraid. After all, Kui Heng had yet to return to the time when the three supreme gods were born. Be it in terms of physical strength or the control of time, he was inferior to the supreme god of man. Therefore, the power that could make the supreme god of man fall into a strange state would most likely cause some damage to him. Even if it could not make him fall into a deep sleep, it should be able to cause some impact. Kui Heng could not accept this situation. I'll not go back further in time for now. I can first strengthen the essence of the great Tao light ball and let the timeline of my existence naturally spread over. Kui Heng thought to himself, this way, it's safer. He could not confirm the situation of the power that caused the supreme god of man to fall into such a strange state, so he naturally would not continue rashly. However, Kui Heng did not intend to retreat to the present time. He looked at Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, Yu Ling, and the others. Then, he raised his right hand and grabbed lightly. The gifts left behind by the supreme god of man landed in his palm. You don't have to accommodate this thing first. Kui Heng put away the 8 portions of the supreme god of man's power and sent down 8 portions of dharmic powers to land in front of the 8 people. You can accommodate and refine these 8 portions of power. The effect will not be inferior to the power of the supreme god of man. He planned to collect all the 12 gifts of the supreme god of man and study them together with the body parts that he had found to see if he could use them to figure out the reason why the supreme god of man had fallen into a strange state. However, he did not want to change the history of the past too much, so he could not let Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, and the others directly lose the possibility of becoming immortal ancestors. Hence, Kui Heng used his dharmic powers to replace the gifts left behind by the supreme god of man in history. He could also let these 8 people step into the immortal ancestor realm. This way, although the established history would still have some changes, the general direction was still similar. It would not cause the collapse of space and time, causing the history of the future to be completely different from the established situation. After doing all of this, Kui Heng left this ancient time and returned to the present. The silver disk star sea, the immortal land in the center, and the pure young palace built inside still existed, but the situation here was completely different from before. Due to Kui Heng's actions at that ancient time, the current pure young palace had already become a dojo that was jointly revered by the primordial world and the Chaos Sea. It could be said to be the most sacred place in the world. This caused the relationship between the primordial world and the Chaos Sea to not be as bad as before. The number of chaos calamities in history had also decreased. In short, although the current timeline had changed quite a bit in terms of details, it still maintained its previous appearance. This was the outcome Kui Heng wanted. If the relationship between the Chaos Sea and the primordial world eased, there would not be so many conflicts and battles. Kui Heng would not be disturbed and could calmly carefully study the 12 powers left behind by the supreme god of man. In the past years, Kui Heng had already collected 12 sets of gifts left behind by the supreme god of man. Even the body parts that originally contained these gifts had been gathered by him. This naturally included the portion that Zhu Xian received. After Kui Heng took it, he gave Zhu Xian a wisp of his dharmic powers as a replacement. In the pure young palace, Kui Heng sat cross-legged in the air. He placed his right hand in front of him and opened it. 12 lights flickered in his palm, all of them containing extremely dense power. Among these lights were some of the supreme god of man's body parts. Blood, bone marrow, brain, eyeballs, ears, tongue, arms, legs, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, a total of 12. Through them, Kui Heng could feel that there was extremely strong resentment and anger contained in these 12 body parts. This was the same emotion he had sensed before. Originally, he felt that this emotion was because Huang Yun, Shu Cheng, and the others had suppressed the supreme god of man while he was sleeping and even dug out some of his body parts to break through. However, after gathering the 12 gifts, Kui Heng realized that his previous guess might be wrong. This extremely strong resentment and anger was not targeted at Huang Yun, Shu Cheng, and the others. Instead, it was targeting an extremely high-level existence that even the supreme god of man feared. In the incomplete information contained in these body parts, there was not even the slightest bit of information about that existence. There was only the feeling of fear towards this existence. With the strength of the supreme god of man, what kind of existence can make him have such emotions? Kui Heng frowned and stared at the 12 gifts. He wondered in a low voice, it can't be those two, right? There was too little information about the two creators. However, they should have been born from nothingness. One symbolizes the beginning and the other symbolizes the end. It was also them who created the world, the current primordial world. Before the birth of the 3 supreme gods, the beginning and end had already been in the primordial world for countless years. No one knew what had happened in those countless years and if other living beings or civilizations had existed. In short, by the time the 3 supreme gods were born, too much time had passed since the primordial world was established. Moreover, after the birth of the 3 supreme gods, the 2 creators, beginning and end, completely disappeared, and no one knew where they went. If it was really one of these 2 mysterious supreme existences, or if both of them had attacked the supreme god of man together, then what reason did they have to do this? Just as Kui Heng was feeling puzzled, the 12 lights spinning in his palm suddenly gathered together, forming a blurry face. The aura of divine power became unprecedentedly dense, as if the supreme god of man had personally descended. I am the ancestor of all living beings. A hoarse and obscure voice came from the blurry face. Help me reconstruct my body and soul, and I will give you a great fortune. 771 Is it the foreign realm or my homeland? 771 Is it the foreign realm or my homeland? It was as if boundless divine might had enveloped Kui Heng, as if the supreme god of man had descended to this era. Although the voice he spoke with was hoarse, it was filled with dignity, as if he had the power to suppress all living beings. If the immortal ancestors were in front of him, they would instantly lose all will to resist and kneel and bow. However, this suppression was only limited to the concept of living beings born from the supreme god of man. Kui Heng had transmigrated from Earth, and he arrived here directly. His essence was unrelated to the living beings in this world, so he was naturally not affected by this suppression. What great fortune! Kui Heng sized up this blurry face and asked with a smile, "Why don't you tell me?" The moment this blurry face appeared, he could already clearly see the level of strength this face possessed. It was only slightly inferior to his current strength. However, this was only on the level of power. It was a completely different story for their power on the time spectrum. Because in the past countless years, these 12 gifts left behind by the Supreme God of Man were all in Kui Heng's hands, it was impossible for the timeline of their existence to be occupied. Therefore, the state of this blurry face could only exist at the current time. As long as Kui Heng made a little modification to the past timeline, he would be able to make this blurry face not even have a chance to appear. At that time, he would no longer exist. Therefore, although this blurry face looked very powerful, everything about it was actually in Kui Heng's hands, including whether it could continue to exist. Your life form is really strange. Could it be that you're from a foreign realm? The blurry face sensed that Kui Heng's life did not come from him and smiled. If you're from a foreign realm, this great fortune is more suitable for you. I don't understand what you're talking about, Kui Heng said in a low voice. He really did not know what the foreign realm this blurry face was talking about. From the context of this blurry face, he should be talking about his place of origin. Was he referring to the realm where Earth was? Or was this so-called foreign realm just a world different from this one? The blurry face fell silent when he heard this. Then, he smiled and said, "Are you worried about something? Don't worry. The beginning and end have long left this world. In theory, the path to the foreign realm should have been closed long ago. However, when I expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth into the void, I accidentally discovered a spatial rift. It's actually a path to the foreign realm. I don't know how you came to our world, nor do I know why you came, but I don't think you know how to return, right?" Kui Heng was not too emotional about the words that came from the mouth of this blurry face. After all, he was an orphan on Earth, so there was nothing to be nostalgic about. Therefore, after hearing the blurry face's words, Kui Heng's expression did not change much. He only said indifferently, "Just this is considered a great fortune. How can it not count?" The blurry face smiled, then became serious. "There's an opportunity to transcend in the foreign realm. As someone who came from the foreign realm, you should know very well that the upper limit of cultivation in the foreign realm is higher than this world and has more opportunities for transcending. If you stay in our world forever, you will never be able to reach the true peak. Sooner or later, you will discover that you can no longer improve." "What do you mean?" Kui Heng's eyes narrowed slightly. He vaguely guessed the intentions of this blurry face, but he could not be sure. "I'm the source of all the living beings in this world. This isn't just an identity," the blurry face said in a low voice. "It's also the highest achievement that the living beings of this world can achieve. The source of all living beings is also the limit of their cultivation. The level I'm at is the upper limit of cultivation in this world. This is not only the upper limit of the living beings born from me, but also the rules of this world. If you can't come into contact with the laws and great Tao of the foreign realm again, you will forever stop at the level I'm at. There's no possibility of improvement." "Oh," Kui Heng asked in a low voice, "In that case, the passageway to the foreign realm is an opportunity for me to break through the upper limit of my cultivation." "That's right." The blurry face nodded and said, "To you, this is definitely a great fortune. As long as you help me reconstruct my body and soul, I'll tell you where the passageway to the foreign realm is." "Did you forget something?" Kui Heng suddenly looked at the blurry face with a faint smile. "The reason why you fell into this state should be related to the foreign realm, right?" Just now, this blurry face had been talking about the benefits of going to that foreign realm, but he avoided talking about his own condition. Clearly, there was something wrong with it. "That is not anything important," the blurry face said without changing his expression. "The reason why I fell into a strange state of slumber was indeed because I was contaminated by the laws and great Tao of the foreign realm. However, this is because I'm one of the origins of this world's laws, that's why I'm suppressed by the power of the foreign realm. It shouldn't be a threat to an alien like you. Should?" Kui Heng laughed when he heard that. He shook his head gently and said, "I never entrust my safety to the word should. On the path of cultivation, one needs to possess some adventurous spirit, the blurry face said with a smile. Compared to the gains, this risk is worth taking. It's definitely a great fortune. You have to know that even the beginning and end has left this place and headed to the foreign realm to search for opportunities to transcend. With your identity as someone from a foreign realm and your current powerful cultivation, you might have a chance to fight for transcendence after returning to the foreign realm. What is transcendence? Kui Heng frowned. However, the meaning of these two words was too vague. 772 Is it the foreign realm or my homeland? 2. 772 Is it the foreign realm or my homeland? 2. I don't know. The blurry face shook his head and said, that is too far away for me. I only heard beginning mention it not long after I was born. After saying so much, you should know that the path to the foreign realm won't be dangerous to you. It can even allow you to surpass the limits of this world. It can be said to be a great fortune. Can you help me? I won't help you. Kui Heng shook his head very simply and said, most of this stuff is just your words. I can't believe it. Moreover, you have a misunderstanding about my cultivation path. My subsequent improvements will not be affected by the upper limit of this world's cultivation. The process of cultivators breaking through from the peak soul formation realm to the return to void realm was to evolve 3,000 great Tao and 480 million laws. This was the foundation of forming a world. In the cultivation process of the return to void realm, one had to understand all the mysteries of the world and reach the level of being all-knowing. One had to raise themselves to an all-encompassing realm and not rely on the great Tao laws of the world. Even if there was a situation of rewinding time and occupying the timeline on the surface, it was essentially to approach the realm of being all-knowing, causing the essence of his great Tao light ball to increase and illuminate more and more of the timeline. Therefore, the upper limit of the great Tao laws of this world actually had no effect on cultivators. Naturally, there was no such thing as needing to go to a foreign realm to break through the upper limit. The blurry face fell silent. After a long time, he said in a low voice, what exactly do you want? How can I get you to help me? I want everything you know, Kui Heng said indifferently. How you were born, all your past experiences, everything you know about the beginning and end, and the two supreme gods of heaven and earth. As long as it's anything you know, just tell me. Is this your cultivation, or should I say the cultivation of the foreign realm? The blurry face was clearly a little surprised and puzzled. In the end, he sighed and said, I can promise you this, but in my current state, I can't answer you much. I can only tell you a portion. How I was born, some of my experiences, some of my understanding of the beginning and end, some of my understanding of the supreme gods of heaven and earth, and some other secrets. But only in part. If you want to understand more complete information, you have to ask me again after you help me reconstruct my body and soul. Kui Heng sneered when he heard this and said in a low voice, you want to say that the current you is not complete and doesn't know all the information. You can only answer after you recover, right? That's right. The blurry face smiled and said, now that my body and soul are damaged and dilapidated, my memories are mostly lost. I naturally can't remember everything. It's normal for me to only know some information. Normal? The sneer on Kui Heng's face did not fade. Since this is a normal situation, there's no need for us to discuss further. With that, before the blurry face could explain, he modified the past and stopped the 12 portions of gifts left behind by the supreme god of man from gathering. Hence, the blurry face at this time disappeared. The 12 gifts were still in Kui Heng's palm. Kui Heng did not care about the great fortune mentioned by the blurry face. He just wanted to obtain some secret information from this strange creature. After all, he had a very clear understanding of his future cultivation path. He did not need any great fortune at all. That would only increase the variables. It might not be worth it. It was not stable enough. It was not Kui Heng's personality. Therefore, after confirming that the blurry face would only pester him repeatedly for help and even threaten him with this great fortune, Kui Heng decisively changed the past of the blurry face. However, the blurry face still contained the power of 12 gifts of the supreme god of man. It was very powerful and could sense the changes in time. It was not so easy to completely dispel. As soon as he disappeared, he reformed and transformed into a blurry face again. He reappeared in front of Kui Heng with the exact same appearance as before. "Why are you angry?" The blurry face smiled. "Everything is negotiable." "There's no need," Kui Heng said indifferently. He changed the past again, causing the blurry face to disappear. At the same time, he also used the spell Immortal Binding Rope in the past spacetime to imprison every part of the supreme god of man's remains, preventing their power from rippling, completely eliminating the possibility of the blurry face being born. It's better not to have such a conditional fortune. Moreover, I don't need it. Kui Heng held the 12 gifts in his palm with a deep gaze. If what that thing said just now is true, there should be traces of being affected by the power of the foreign realm in the gifts left behind by the supreme god of man. Thinking of this, a faint golden light appeared in his eyes, as if it contained the power to see through the essence of everything in the world. Spiritual golden eyes. When Kui Heng reached the late-stage return to Void Realm, the effect of the spiritual golden eyes naturally increased. Even if he could not investigate the situation of the so-called blood clearly, he should be able to see clearly how the gifts of the supreme god of man were affected. Actually, he had planned to use the spiritual golden eyes to investigate just now, but his actions were interrupted by the appearance of that blurry face. Under the gaze of the spiritual golden eyes, the 12 portions of gifts left behind by the supreme god of man began to reveal the deep structure of the interior and what changes it had experienced in the past countless years. In order to prevent any accidents, Kui Heng was also prepared to escape into the grotto heaven at any time to prevent any powerful existences from being alarmed during this investigation. At first, Kui Heng did not detect any abnormalities. The situation inside these gifts was normal. There were no signs of them being suppressed by external forces. However, as he investigated deeper, he felt that something was wrong. The light of the spiritual golden eyes actually began to be rejected. This made his exploration difficult, but he could still continue deeper. Gradually, wisps of light that were like starlight entered Kui Heng's vision. In the deepest part of the gifts left behind by the supreme god of man, there seemed to be dazzling stars. This made Kui Heng feel like he was not investigating the gifts left behind by the supreme god of man. Instead, he was investigating a strange and ancient starry sky. Could this be the power of the foreign realm that can make a person fall into a strange sleep? Kui Heng's vigilance increased again, and the process of investigation slowed down a little more as he proceeded carefully. As long as there was the slightest sense of danger, he would directly enter the grotto heaven to ensure his safety. However, the sense of danger did not appear. Kui Heng used his spiritual golden eyes to continue probing along the wisps of starlight. In the end, he felt that he had arrived at the deepest part of these gifts, and also the source. There was indeed a ball of bright starlight entrenched here, faintly suppressing the gifts left behind by the supreme god of man. Then, Kui Heng looked at the starlight and tried to investigate its source and essence. In the next moment, he felt a shadow suddenly flash before his eyes, causing his entire body to tremble and stiffen. How is this possible? Kui Heng could not help but exclaim. He was extremely familiar with the scene in this light. It was an aqua-blue planet floating in the dark void. Earth. 773 Rewinding Time, Era of the Supreme God of Man. 773 Rewinding Time, Era of the Supreme God of Man Earth. It was actually the Earth. This starlight that made people fall into a strange sleep came from Earth. How did this happen? In Kui Heng's impression, Earth was just an ordinary planet. A nascent soul cultivator could destroy it with ease. Unless this planet only looked identical to Earth and was not essentially the same. But what was the difference between such thoughts and self-deception? Is this really Earth? Kui Heng frowned slightly and thought to himself, if I really want to confirm it, I'm afraid I have to really go back to that time point. Fortunately, after this exploration, it's not like I didn't gain anything. At the very least, I can confirm that this power that can make people fall into a strange state can't affect me. However, I can't figure out what this means. Could it be that this power can't affect me because I transmigrated from Earth? Thinking of this, he shook his head and thought to himself, it's useless to think too much now. When my cultivation realm advances and the power of the great Tao light ball increases, I'll return to the time when the three supreme gods fought to investigate. When Kui Heng investigated the gifts of the supreme god of man just now, he could already clearly determine the approximate strength of the supreme god of man. Just as he had expected, the supreme god of man's strength did not exceed the limits of the late-stage return to Void Realm, nor was he much stronger than his current self. As long as he broke through again, he would be able to compete with the supreme god of man. Ever since Kui Heng broke through to the late-stage return to Void Realm, his strength had increased countless times. In the beginning, he only occupied a portion of the timeline of more than 10,000 years and could already kill an immortal ancestor on the timeline he occupied. The current Kui Heng had already occupied nearly 50 billion Primeval eras, which was 2.8 trillion years. The Great Tao Ball of Light also went from being able to illuminate more than 10,000 years to being able to illuminate nearly 50 billion Primeval eras. The improvement could no longer be described with numbers. Therefore, even if the Supreme God of Man was an expert countless times stronger than the immortal ancestors, he was not much stronger than Kui Heng in his current state. Moreover, just now, Kui Heng had investigated the gifts left behind by the Supreme God of Man and discovered traces of Earth. This knowledge brought him closer to the level of all-knowing and had also increased his cultivation realm. This further narrowed the gap between Kui Heng and the Supreme God of Man. To me, there aren't many unknowns left. Kui Heng sat cross-legged and thought to himself, to summarize, there are only 6 aspects. The situation of the 3 supreme gods, the situation of the foreign realm, the situation of the beginning and end, Chichi's whereabouts, the origin of the system, and the reason why I transmigrated. At the thought of this, he could not help but laugh. Chichi's whereabouts can actually be ranked with these unknowns. It's really strange. Now, Kui Heng was 100% sure that Jiang Chichi definitely had a big secret. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to not be able to find her. Now, he had already occupied an extremely long part of the timeline, and it was on the space-time level. This included the 300 years he was in the beginner's space. In this long period of time, it was impossible for anyone's whereabouts to be hidden from his perception. Normally speaking, Kui Heng should at least be able to find Jiang Chichi at a certain time point. But in reality, that was not the case. After Kui Heng ended his exploration of the gifts left behind by the Supreme God of Man, he followed his previous plan to find Jiang Chichi's whereabouts. Initially, he thought that it would not be difficult. Unexpectedly, Jiang Chichi seemed to have disappeared from the past, without a trace. Even the timeline that she had once existed only had a space-time imprint to maintain the normal course of history. It was not the real her. For example, establishing the Immortal Dawn sect, resisting the experts of the heavenly void world, heading to the Purple Sun realm, and so on. Wherever Jiang Chichi had personally appeared, there were only spatial imprints left. Her true body was gone. It was as if Jiang Chichi had already jumped out of the known spacetime of this universe. This situation was too bizarre. It could even be said to be unbelievable. If it was just her, she definitely wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Who's interfering? Kui Heng frowned slightly and thought to himself, it's impossible for the 3 supreme gods to exceed the late-stage return to Void Realm. Could it be the beginning and end? But what's the reason for them to do this? What's their intention? And how did they do it? Could it be that they let Chichi go to the so-called foreign realm where Earth is? Jiang Chichi's situation left him puzzled. What he couldn't figure out was what was so special about Jiang Chichi that such a strange situation would happen. After I understand the situation of the 3 supreme gods, I should be able to try to go further back until the era of the beginning and end. Kui Heng's eyes slowly closed again, and his aura became incomparably calm. I want to see what other mysteries there were at the beginning of ancient times. Do I really have to go back to the beginning of the creation of the world to break through to the peak return to Void Realm? In the next period of time, he no longer took the initiative to occupy the timeline. Instead, he placed all his energy on increasing the influence of the Great Tao Light Ball, which was to increase his evolution of the great Tao laws. At Kui Heng's current realm, he was no longer cultivating alone. All of his incarnations in the past and present were doing the same thing. In addition, there was also the adjustment of the flow of time. Tens of millions of years passed in the blink of an eye. Therefore, in the eyes of outsiders, not much time had passed at all. In less than a day, Kui Heng had already made a breakthrough with the great Tao light ball. His essence had increased greatly, and he could naturally illuminate an even longer stretch of the timeline. 774 Rewinding Time, Era of the Supreme God of Man, 2. 774 Rewinding Time, Era of the Supreme God of Man, 2. The Great Tao Light Ball was essentially an external phenomenon of Kui Heng's cultivation. This also meant that Kui Heng's strength had become stronger and had truly reached a level comparable to the three supreme gods. Next, as long as he occupied the timeline of the past and became an existence as ancient as the three supreme gods, his strength would further increase and directly surpass the three supreme gods. At that time, it would be much more convenient for him to understand some ancient secrets. There's no need to go back too far. I'll go back to the time when the Supreme God of Man successfully expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth from the primordial world. Kui Heng quickly made a decision. Then, he directly condensed a space-time Tao mark at that incomparably ancient time point and became a living being who was personally experiencing that history. However, this living being was too powerful, bringing a small change to that era. The battle where the Supreme God of Man expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth was also a battle where the source of life of the humans suppressed matter and rules. This battle affected the entire primordial world, and almost every inch of land was ignited with the flames of war. Even after the battle, the entire primordial world was still in endless chaos. Be it the laws or matter, they were all in chaos. The Supreme God of Man at this time point was still in a complete state. He had not fallen into a deep sleep, nor had his body parts been dug out. He had just ended his battle with the supreme gods of heaven and earth. It should have been a moment of triumph and satisfaction for him. Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, Yu Ling, and the other 9 people behind him were about to step forward to congratulate him when they realized that there was a strange force wrapped around the Supreme God of Man, preventing them from approaching. At this moment, his state seemed a little strange. He ignored Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, Yu Ling, and the others and returned to the human sacred palace. He sat in the deepest part of the hall and closed his door. What was that just now? Could it be the place of transcendence mentioned by the beginning and end? The Supreme God of Man muttered, but why is there such a strange power surging over? I actually can't expel it with my strength. He had already sensed a strange power invading his body and continuously becoming stronger, affecting and suppressing his body and soul. What exactly is this thing? Is the power of the foreign realm so powerful? The Supreme God of Man was shocked. He realized that he was actually helpless against this strange power. He could not even stop it from becoming stronger, let alone expel it. This situation was unprecedented. The Supreme God of Man did not panic when he fought the supreme gods of heaven and earth at the same time. But now that he encountered this strange and treacherous power, he felt a little flustered. He was a supreme god born from the concept of living beings. He was born with boundless divine powers and strength, but he was still a living being. As long as one was a living being, they would panic and be terrified. However, just as many complicated emotions appeared in the Supreme God of Man's heart, wisps of information suddenly synchronized into his perception. The Supreme God of Man froze on the spot, his face revealing an incomparably shocked expression. His eyes flickered as he subconsciously looked in the direction of the human sacred palace. At this moment, Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, Yu Ling, and the others were waiting in that direction. There's actually such a thing. How bold. The Supreme God of Man was shocked and furious. Then, he shook his head and sighed softly. And there's actually such a strange person. A guest from the foreign realm. Just now, he had received a message from the future. The source of this information was the blurry face formed by the 12 gifts. Although the blurry face could not travel back in time, he could use the connection between him and his main body. During that short period of condensation, It established a connection with the main body in the human sacred palace and synchronized the information with the main body in the endless past. Hence, the supreme god of man at this time knew what would happen countless years later, and he also knew about the developments over the years. Among them, there was naturally the matter of Huang Yun, Xu Cheng, Yu Ling, and the others actually suppressing him while he was in a deep sleep and digging out all kinds of body parts. However, this actually did not attract much of his attention. What he was most concerned about was the Kui Heng mentioned in the future information. A foreign visitor who cultivated a strange path and had high strength and amazing abilities. He could be said to be unbelievably and extremely powerful. Moreover, if nothing unexpected happened, Kui Heng would also appear in this era. Just as the supreme god of man was thinking this, he suddenly felt waves rise in the river of time. An incomparably powerful existence had descended into this era out of thin air. This is Kui Heng. The supreme god of man looked outside and stood up. At the same time, he suppressed the foreign power in his body and walked out of the human sacred palace. Before Kui Heng descended to this time, he had already sensed the movement of the blurry face. Therefore, he did not hide anything when he descended to this era. The fluctuations of the river of time were naturally very obvious. To the current Kui Heng, the whereabouts of the supreme god of man could not be hidden from his perception. Therefore, when he appeared in front of the human sacred palace, the supreme god of man happened to walk out. In his complete state, he looked like a young man, but his hair was white and he was filled with a holy aura. He was also wearing a pure white robe, adding a pure aura. "You're Kui Heng?" The supreme god of man sized up Kui Heng. At the same time, he carefully sensed Kui Heng's aura and could not help but exclaim, "This is the cultivation path of the foreign realm? It's really amazing." As the source of cultivation in this world, he was extremely sensitive to cultivation techniques. Even if he only sensed a trace of Kui Heng's dharmic powers, he could clearly sense the profundity of this power. I didn't expect the complete supreme god of man to be so holy and gentle. Kui Heng also looked at the person in front of him in surprise. His divine sense was extremely sharp, and he could tell that this expert who had expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth should be relatively gentle in nature. He might even hate fighting. Usually gentle people are the most extreme when they're angry. The supreme god of man smiled, but he didn't say anything else and changed the topic. "You didn't come at this time to see my personality. Are you here for the passage to the foreign realm?" "Yes and no." Kui Heng smiled and said, "Even if I don't have anything to do here, I still have to come to this era. This is a part of my path of cultivation." If he wanted to continue to trace back to the ancient starting point and occupy it, he definitely could not let go of any key time periods. This supreme god of man had just expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth. He was undoubtedly a key point. "Whatever you want to do, I can accommodate you." The supreme god of man smiled and said, "There's no conflict between us. There's no need to fight and kill, right?" "That's true." Kui Heng nodded and smiled. "But I want to know all your past experiences, and all your secrets will be revealed to me." "No problem. This era is different from the future era," the supreme god of man said indifferently. "In this era, there are few living beings. Everyone knows each other very well and there are almost no secrets. Ask away." 775 possibilities of the past, present, and future. 775 possibilities of the past, present, and future. The supreme god of man's cooperative attitude was really beyond Kui Heng's expectations. Initially, he thought that he had to at least fight around with him before he could successfully explore the secrets of the supreme god of man. He did not expect the other party to be so straightforward. "You seem surprised," the supreme god of man smiled. "Indeed." Kui Heng nodded. "There's no need to be surprised." A bitter smile appeared on his face. He shook his head gently and said, "If it were the previous me, I would fight you first no matter what. But now, I'm already suppressed by the power of the foreign realm and will fall into a deep sleep in a few days. At that time, I won't have the ability to resist whatever you want to do to me. In that case, it's better to directly answer your questions. It can be considered as doing a good deed and forming a good relationship. If you feel a sudden impulse one day, you can help me resolve the suppression of this foreign power. Your mentality has changed very quickly. Kui Heng sized up the supreme god of man again and asked solemnly, I want to know all the information you know about that foreign realm. That's not difficult. After all, I don't know much. The supreme god of man smiled and said, the existence of the foreign realm was mentioned to me when I heard High Lord beginning preach the Tao not long after I was born. There's a special foreign realm that provides an opportunity for him to transcend. He said that if he left this world in the future, it will be to the foreign realm. Originally, this was all the information I understood, but after the battle with the supreme gods of heaven and earth ended, I accidentally saw a path to the foreign realm and saw a trace of the laws of the foreign realm. I was greatly affected by it. The foreign realm I saw seemed to be just an ordinary universe. Although it has endless space and stars, it's nothing much. Its essence is not high, but it contains an extremely terrifying suppression power. There's not much foreign power that invaded my body, but it can make me fall into a strange sleep for the rest of my life without any ability to resist. Even the power of High Lord beginning is probably only at this level. Is the power of the foreign realm really so powerful? Kui Heng frowned slightly. Although he had already understood some of the situation earlier, he was still a little surprised to hear the supreme god of man's personal explanation. Currently, his strength was at most slightly higher than that of the supreme god of man. If not for the fact that his cultivation path was special, he would probably be unable to resist such a level of suppression. This was too powerful. However, there was something that puzzled Kui Heng in the content of the supreme god of man's narration. You've only been talking about beginning. What's End's opinion of that foreign realm? The beginning and end were the only two creators he knew about. They were supreme existences born together with the primordial world. Among them, beginning was the beginning of everything, the origin of the myriad Taos, the cause of all karma. And end was the end of everything. He was the final destination of all living beings, the end of eternity. Kui Heng had some guesses about these two existences. They should have occupied the beginning and end of time the moment they were born and covered the entirety of the timeline. If that was really the case, the beginning and end should be all-knowing. They could most likely be omnipotent. At the very least, they were existences equivalent to the peak of the return to void realm or even the Tao integration realm. End. Human Divine was clearly stunned when he heard this. Then, he shook his head and said with a smile, no one has ever seen High Lord End. High Lord Beginning said that when High Lord End appears, it will be the end of everything, so it's better not to see him. No one has ever seen End. Kui Heng raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard this and said in a low voice, I remember you saying that the beginning and end have both gone to the foreign realm. Although no one has ever seen End, beginning and end will not live separate lives, the supreme god of man explained. Since High Lord Beginning has gone to the foreign realm, the High Lord End must have also gone to the foreign realm. Is this what Beginning told you? Kui Heng asked. No, the supreme god of man shook his head and said, a naturally born supreme god like me will naturally obtain some information from the world, so I was born with this knowledge. The knowledge that the beginning and end will not live separate lives is what I naturally knew when I was born. It's the principles of nature. I see. There's actually such a thing. Kui Heng could not help but click his tongue in wonder. However, he thought of something else that was very important to him. If the beginning and end had really gone to the foreign realm and were no longer in this world, wouldn't it mean that the three supreme gods were the highest existences in this world? And his current strength was already slightly greater than the supreme god of man. I'm already invincible. This thought suddenly appeared in Kui Heng's heart. He thought to himself, if the beginning and end have really left, then there won't be any supreme experts at the beginning and end of time. This way, will there be no obstacles for me to go back to the starting point of time? Not only will I be able to go back in time, but if I want to occupy the lower reaches of the timeline in the future, there shouldn't be any obstacles. After surpassing the three supreme gods, Kui Heng knew very well that the only people that could hinder his cultivation were beginning and end. Now that he knew that beginning and end were no longer in this world, this meant that there were no more obstacles ahead. He could occupy the entire timeline of this world without any worries. He could even replace the position of beginning and end in the original history and become the new beginning and new end. After all, as long as beginning and end had really left this world, there would only be a spatial mark in the timeline they had once occupied to ensure the normal flow of time. This mark was essentially a dead thing and would not resist at all. It was extremely easy to replace it. If this is true, I might be able to return to the beginning of time and directly occupy all the timeline from the beginning to the present. 776 possibilities of the past, present, and future, 2. 776 possibilities of the past, present, and future, 2. Kui Heng's heart could not help but burn with passion as he thought to himself, such achievements and knowledge should be enough for me to break through to the peak return to Void Realm. If I'm not wrong, the path of the peak return to Void Realm should be to occupy the future timeline from the present to the end. As long as end has really left this world like beginning, there won't be any obstacles in the process of me occupying the future timeline until the final point. If I occupy the entire timeline from the beginning of time to the end, then I'll know everything about this world and become all-knowing and omnipotent. At that time, can I be considered to have reached the limit of the peak return to Void Realm? Will I have the qualifications to step into the Tao integration realm? For a moment, many thoughts appeared in his mind. However, the premise of all of this was that beginning and end had really left this world. Otherwise, everything was just an unrealistic fantasy. Although with his divine senses, there was no chance that the Supreme God of Man could deceive him, he could not guarantee that the Supreme God of Man himself was not deceived. What the Supreme God of Man thought might not be true. I still have to be careful. Kui Heng thought to himself, I have to be even more careful at this time. Otherwise, if I'm not careful, I might be consigned to eternal damnation and all my previous efforts will be in vain. If beginning and end did not actually leave this world, and he rashly went to occupy the starting point of the timeline to replace beginning there, an intense conflict would definitely erupt. Kui Heng did not think that he could compete with an existence like beginning. Not to mention that if he really fought with beginning, he might have to face end at the same time. He was probably not even a match for beginning, let alone fight beginning and end together. If such a situation happened, there was most likely only one way out, and that was to hide in the grotto heaven. The Supreme God of Man standing at the side did not know that Kui Heng had already thought so much. He continued, that's all I know about beginning and end. Do you have anything else to ask? I do have a question. Kui Heng retracted his wandering thoughts and said to everyone, what's the real reason that you expelled the Supreme Gods of Heaven and Earth? According to some information he had once obtained, the reason why the Supreme God of Man expelled the Supreme Gods of Heaven and Earth was very simple. As the symbol of the living beings, he instinctively wanted the living beings to control everything, including laws and matter. As long as the Supreme Gods of Heaven and Earth were in the primordial world, he would not be able to achieve this goal. Therefore, the Supreme God of Man had to expel the Supreme Gods of Heaven and Earth from the primordial world and let the living beings control everything here, allowing the concept of living beings to constantly expand. In this story, the Supreme God of Man was a very principled person. His thoughts and methods of doing things were based on the point of symbolizing living beings. But now that Kui Heng had truly come into contact with the Supreme God of Man, he was already certain that the Supreme God of Man was clearly not the type of person who would do that. Instead, he was more like a living person. He had emotional fluctuations and changes in personality. He was a real living being. This situation was actually normal. Or rather, this situation should be normal. After all, if the person who symbolizes the concept of living beings was no longer a living being, what else could be called a living being? The way of thinking of a living being should not be forcibly conformed by the rules symbolized by a supreme God. The reason is very simple. I felt that they were dangerous, so I had to strike first. The Supreme God of Man said with his usual expression, the expansion of the concept of living beings depends on the quantity and quality of living beings. Quantity is very easy to understand. It's nothing more than the fact that the more living beings there are, the stronger I will be. The quality refers to the essence of life, and it can also be understood as the strength of the living being's cultivation realm. The higher the cultivation realm of the living beings, the higher the essence of their life. The greater the improvement it can bring me, but there's a limit. The increase in quantity brings about very limited benefits for me. If I want a huge improvement, new high-level living beings have to appear. However, such living beings can only be encountered by luck, and there's a limit to cultivation. I can foresee that one day in the future, my realm and level will probably be unable to increase again. After all, the supreme gods of heaven and earth only need to handle the expansion of nomological concepts and physical concepts respectively. There's almost no bottleneck and they can continue to become stronger. Even if our current strength is not much different, sooner or later, I will fall far behind them. In that case, it's better for me to attack first. Kui Heng fell into a short silence. This reason was indeed very simple. It could even be said to be a little cliché, but it was also very realistic. Living beings were always worried about their future. As the symbol of the concept of living beings, it was reasonable for the supreme god of man to make such a decision. If I were in the foreign realm, I probably wouldn't have to do such a thing. At this moment, the supreme god of man suddenly sighed and said, "You're already stronger than me just by cultivating. You can even continue to become stronger. Is your cultivation path limitless?" "I don't know if there's a limit." Kui Heng shook his head gently and said, "I only know that there's a path ahead, but I don't know if this path is long or short or if there's an end." The peak return to Void Realm already symbolized omnipotence. Even if there was only the primordial world here and the boundless chaos sea, they could be considered a multi-universe existence. What was the Tao integration, tribulation transcendence, and Mahayana realm above that? What was the immortal ascension realm after Mahayana? Kui Heng did not know any of this, and it was even difficult for him to guess. That's great. A path that allows continuous improvement is really great. The living beings on your side can continue to become stronger too. When the supreme god of man heard Kui Heng's words, his eyes were filled with envy. He sighed and said, "I wonder what the supreme god of man of your world will look like. He must be very powerful." "Perhaps." Kui Heng smiled. However, he did not explain that his cultivation system did not come from the so-called foreign realm, but from the system. As for the source of the system and where the system had obtained this immortal cultivation technique, it was not something that Kui Heng could figure out for now. At this moment, the supreme god of man had already slowly restrained his emotions and said to Kui Heng, "Is there anything else you want to ask?" "There's nothing for the time being. I'm going to some places next." Kui Heng shook his head gently, then smiled and said, "There might be some changes to the past that will appear in your memories later." Then, his figure swayed slightly and he instantly disappeared without a trace, as if he had left this world. However, the supreme god of man could sense some of Kui Heng's movements in this era. Of course, Kui Heng did not leave this world. He only left this era and came to the vast river of time that seemed to flow unendingly. I've already occupied this timeline. Next, I'll start from the era where the three supreme gods are still around and go back bit by bit until the time when beginning and end has yet to leave. If they really left, what I will see should be just imprints. Even if they didn't leave, there wouldn't be a direct conflict. I can give it a try. 777 imprint. 777 imprint. Kui Heng left the primordial world of this time point and entered the river of time. He began to trace back to an even more ancient past. After passing through this era where only the supreme god of man was left, he quickly saw the river of time ahead of him rumbling. The entire space-time was filled with the aura of destruction, as if it wanted to bury everything in the world. At this time, the most dazzling figures were three figures. They all emitted extremely powerful auras. They stood on the river of time and looked down on all living beings. They were the three supreme gods. After beginning and end left this world, these three were the supreme existences of the world. No living being could compare to them. Even Huang Yun, Shu Cheng, and the others, who were barely holding the sage battle halberd to assist in this battle, were only doing so because they had obtained the power of the sage divine jade and the uniqueness of the sage battle halberd. Kui Heng had always been a little curious about the battle between these three supreme existences. The three supreme gods all had strength comparable to the late-stage return to Void Realm, and they were not ordinary late-stage return to Void Realm cultivators. What kind of scene was it when they were fighting with all their might, and what kind of phenomena were there? This time, Kui Heng finally saw it. He stood in the river of time and looked down at the primordial world below. He saw the battle between the three of them clearly and had a true understanding of their strength. The supreme god of man at his peak is indeed stronger than any of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Kui Heng thought to himself, no wonder he could win this battle. However, he did not interfere in the battle between the three supreme gods. He only looked down from the river of time and did not take any action. Until the end of this war that had affected the primordial world and the chaos sea for countless years. When the supreme god of man successfully expelled the supreme gods of heaven and earth and was about to see the passage to the foreign realm, he left the river of time and descended. After the supreme god of man discovered that he was suppressed by the power of the foreign realm, he had also tried to modify this part of history to prevent himself from looking at this foreign passage. However, he did not succeed. The suppression power from the foreign realm still existed. The sight of the passage to the foreign realm seemed to have been deeply imprinted in his past experiences and could not be erased no matter what. This strange situation made Kui Heng curious. Moreover, the power of the so-called foreign realm was suspected to be emitted from Earth, so after coming to this time point, he planned to personally investigate this foreign passage. Of course, Kui Heng did not rashly go down, nor did he stand in front of the supreme god of man to investigate the situation. The first thing he did was to stand at a close distance and observe to determine the essence of the power of the so-called foreign realm. At the same time, he would determine if it was harmful to him or a threat. Moreover, this investigation was not a one-time thing. Through rewinding time, Kui Heng tried it more than 30,000 times. After a series of situation simulations, he confirmed that this so-called foreign realm passage was no threat to him. After confirming this, he appeared and descended to this time point, stopping the supreme god of man who was about to see the passageway to the foreign realm. The supreme god of man did not expect to be suddenly stopped. He shouted sternly, "Who is it?" However, as soon as he said this, the expression on his face suddenly changed. He froze and stood there in a daze, his body trembling. I've escaped my established fate. The supreme god of man looked at his hands in disbelief. The suppression of the foreign power on me has disappeared. At this moment, he had already synchronized the information with his future self. He knew what he would experience and what Kui Heng had just done. The supreme god of man had not expected Kui Heng to break him free from the entanglement of the forces of the foreign realm with just this obstruction. This was a stroke of bad luck that he had tried his best to escape countless times. Now, it was easily resolved by Kui Heng. Facing such a situation, no matter how calm the supreme god of man's mind was, it was difficult to suppress the shock in his heart. He almost walked forward to thank him. However, he quickly realized that Kui Heng was observing the foreign passage. Hence, he immediately stopped and waited at the side, not daring to make a sound. At this moment, Kui Heng's gaze was fixed on this strange passageway. He was bewildered and thought to himself, it's really Earth. This passageway to the foreign realm was not a normal spatial passageway. It did not have a physical carrier. It was like a painting floating in the air, allowing people to see the scene of a starry sky. Through this picture, Kui Heng not only saw Earth, but also Mercury, Venus, Mars, and so on. Of course, there was also the core sun. However, he did not feel any abnormal power invading. Just like the situation when he investigated earlier, this foreign passage did not affect him at all. However, in contrast, Kui Heng could not really come into contact with this foreign passage. Therefore, he could only observe the foreign passage, but he could not test its effect, let alone try to use this passage to go to the universe where Earth was. What's going on with this passage? Kui Heng frowned, and then his eyes lit up with a faint golden light. He had used the spiritual golden eyes. He planned to investigate the essence of this strange passageway. With Kui Heng's current cultivation, there was almost nothing that could hide from his spiritual golden eyes. Although the state of this foreign passage was strange, under the gaze of the spiritual golden eyes, its original appearance was still revealed. The picture floating in the air suddenly distorted. The scenes of Earth, Mercury, Venus, Mars, the Sun, and so on also became blurry. 778 Imprint, 2. 778 Imprint, 2. These scenes seemed to have all gathered together, condensing into a strange ball of light that looked both like a colorful spot and completely colorless. It floated in the air. Kui Heng hesitated for a moment before revealing a trace of dharmic powers to come into contact with this strange ball of light. Then, the ball of light changed again and turned into a palm-sized solar system model that kept spinning in the void. When the trace of dharmic powers Kui Heng released was exhausted, the miniature solar system disappeared and returned to the appearance of a strange ball of light. However, although it was only a short change, it allowed him to figure out what this ball of light was and what its use was. Rather than calling it a passage, it's more like a space-time road sign. Kui Heng thought to himself, this light ball is actually the imprint of the solar system at a certain time. Through it, one can descend to the solar system at this time. However, there seems to be an extremely powerful barrier between this world and the solar system. With my current cultivation realm, I can't go over yet. Perhaps I can give it a try after I break through to the peak return to Void Realm. However, since there are space-time signs to locate the solar system, are there also similar signs on Earth? Is my transmigration related to this? For a moment, many thoughts and guesses appeared in his mind again, but he quickly adjusted his mentality and restrained himself from thinking about these things. The most important thing now is to try to return to the starting point of this world as soon as possible and strive to break through to the peak return to Void Realm. Kui Heng thought to himself. Then, he put the strange ball of light into his grotto heaven and looked at the person beside him. He smiled and said, "How do you feel?" "Feel?" The supreme god of man was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, "Very good, very good. I feel unprecedentedly good." With that, he bowed deeply to Kui Heng with extreme respect. "Thank you. I just helped you in passing. This is also one of my cultivation methods." Kui Heng waved his hand and chuckled. At this moment, he had already occupied this time period and completed the integration of the timeline. His identity was a mysterious expert who had saved the supreme god of man once. In reality, when Kui Heng put away the strange ball of light, he had already entered the river of time and continued to move further back in time. In this bright silver river of time, he walked through the era of the three supreme gods, and the era of the human race gradually becoming stronger. He arrived at the era where the human race was born and struggled to survive. Step by step, he moved further back and became more and more ancient. Finally, Kui Heng arrived at an era where the human race had yet to be born. The world was still as wild as before, and all the natural laws were filled with a primitive and vast aura. In this era, the supreme god of heaven had just been born, and the laws had yet to begin to expand. The supreme god of earth had only been born not long ago, and the world had not begun to expand. Needless to say, there were very few living beings in this vast world because of the supreme god of man. After a long time, he returned to the most ancient times. Kui Heng had finally arrived at an era that beginning and end had not yet left. The past, present and future identities of the supreme gods were unified in the timeline. The supreme god of man at this time point also knew Kui Heng. Therefore, after Kui Heng arrived at this time point, he went to look for the supreme god of man of this era. He did not expect that the supreme gods of heaven and earth were also here. The three of them were drinking tea in a very friendly manner. They did not look like they had experienced a huge battle in the future at all. Since the supreme god of man of the future could synchronize information with his body in this era, so could the supreme god of heaven and supreme god of earth. This also meant that they knew what had happened in the future. Yet, they could still appear so harmonious. Dao brother Kui. When the supreme god of man saw Kui Heng arrive, he took the initiative to stand up and cup his hands. The supreme god of heaven and supreme god of earth beside him also stood up and bowed, their expressions normal. However, Kui Heng looked at their expressions and actions and used his divine sense to sense the aura on their bodies. He immediately frowned. "Dao brother Kui, let's talk in private," the supreme god of man said to Kui Heng. Then, he bade farewell to the supreme gods of heaven and earth and left with Kui Heng to a secluded mountain peak. Are the supreme gods of heaven and earth at this time point just a historical imprint? Kui Heng asked directly. But if they're just a historical imprint, why are they so real? Just now, after he saw the supreme god of heaven and the supreme god of earth, he did not notice anything wrong at first glance. It was only when they bowed with the supreme god of man that he realized that something was wrong. Although the supreme gods of heaven and earth at this time looked normal on the surface, Kui Heng could sense with his divine sense that they were no longer living beings. Instead, they had become imprints similar to a natural phenomenon. Their only use was to maintain the interaction in the original history and maintain the normal progress of time. They have already been transformed into Tao, which is equivalent to no longer existing, the supreme god of man explained. But the past history still exists, so it naturally formed imprints similar to a natural phenomenon. In the established history, they will communicate with me like the real supreme gods of heaven and earth. They can even fight me. Their strength is not diminished at all. It's just that they won't know about the future. Even if history is changed, they will naturally make changes. If one's realm is not high enough, they will not be able to discover any abnormality at all. This way, they can maintain the normal progress of time to the greatest extent. Maintain the normal progress of time? Kui Heng laughed when he heard that. He asked instead, why should time move forward normally? Isn't time something that can be controlled at will? As an expert who controls the changes of time, you actually left 2 time imprints to maintain the normal progress of time after the Tao transformation. Moreover, they're imprints with the same power and thoughts. What is this? The supreme god of man fell silent when he heard this. For a moment, he did not know how to answer. After a long while, he said, "This is indeed a little strange. I don't know why either. Perhaps this is the rule from the beginning of time." At this point, he suddenly paused and asked, "Do you want to meet High Lord Beginning? He has yet to leave this era." "All right." Kui Heng nodded slightly and said, "Let's go." To experts at the level of Kui Heng and Supreme God of Man, the primordial world of this era could be said to be quite exquisite. They could instantly arrive anywhere in this world. However, in order to show their respect for Beginning, the 2 of them did not descend directly to the entrance of the Palace of Beginning. Instead, they descended a little further and walked over. When Kui Heng and the Supreme God of Man arrived at the entrance of the Palace of Beginning, they saw a handsome youth with white wings standing there. His hair was tied up with a red hair crown, and he looked like an elegant white crane. "Supreme God of Man, is this a new living being you created?" The youth asked the Supreme God of Man curiously. There were very few living beings in this era and they were very familiar with each other. "His life level is above mine." The Supreme God of Man shook his head gently and said, "We've come to pay our respects to High Lord Beginning." "Oh, the Lord is inside. I'll bring you in." The youth turned around and walked towards the Palace of Beginning. As he walked, he smiled and said, "Supreme God of Man, don't you symbolize all living beings? How can there be a living being at a higher level than you?" He seemed to be very curious about Kui Heng, but he did not dare to ask Kui Heng directly, so he kept asking the Supreme God of Man. He only stopped when he reached the deepest part of the palace. "Here, in front is the place where the Lord is meditating. Go ahead." The youth pointed at the meditation room in front of him, then turned around and left. Then, Kui Heng and the Supreme God of Man walked into the meditation room and saw that it was empty. There was only a meditation cushion placed here. There was no third person at all. "There's no one?" Kui Heng frowned slightly. At this moment, the Supreme God of Man seemed to have seen a supreme existence. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the meditation cushion. "Greetings, High Lord Beginning." However, there was no one in front of him at all. There was only an empty meditation cushion. 779 From now on, I am the ancestor of creation. 779 From now on, I am the ancestor of creation. In Kui Heng's perception, the meditation cushion was empty. There was no High Lord Beginning. This was not because he could not see High Lord Beginning sitting there. Instead, it was because he had seen the true appearance of this place. Beginning was no longer here. There were no traces of any imprint left behind, and he had completely disappeared. At this moment, the supreme god of man was only worshipping Beginning in his mind. In that case, the path that I've crafted will work now. Kui Heng thought to himself and walked straight towards the empty meditation cushion. At this moment, the supreme god of man was still kneeling on the ground and bowing to the empty meditation cushion. At the same time, he was very worried. Why was Kui Heng still displaying such an attitude when facing High Lord Beginning? He did not even bow. Wasn't he afraid that High Lord Beginning would be unhappy? But at this moment, the supreme god of man suddenly saw Kui Heng walking towards the meditation cushion. It was as if he treated this meditation cushion as an ownerless item. He completely ignored High Lord Beginning who was sitting there. What is he doing? What is he trying to do? Is he crazy? The supreme god of man was terrified. He did not expect Kui Heng to suddenly do this, let alone understand why Kui Heng would do this. Could it be that he thought that his cultivation was profound and his strength was powerful, so he wanted to compete with High Lord Beginning? But this was too ridiculous. How would he dare? Sitting on the meditation cushion was the beginning of everything. The source of everything, the ancestor of creation, and the origin of myriad techniques. Such an existence could no longer be described using cultivation realms. This was because it was impossible for any cultivation path to reach the level he was at. His existence alone was proof of his supremacy. At this moment, the supreme god of man was so shocked that his guts were about to split open, but he did not dare to make a sound to remind Kui Heng. As a supreme god born from the beginning and end, his understanding of beginning was that he was an incomparably high being. Other than High Lord End who was on the same level, there was absolutely no existence that could compare to him. In front of such a supreme existence, he had always only dared to be respectful. He would only speak when he received permission and would never take the initiative to say anything. At this moment, Kui Heng had already walked to the meditation cushion. He quietly looked at the empty meditation cushion and enveloped it with his divine sense. For a moment, layers of distorted light and shadows appeared in his perception, as if countless images of the past and future were intertwined here and gathered on this meditation cushion. Clearly, this meditation cushion was not a simple meditation cushion, but also a symbol of the flow of time. It was the place where the past and future intertwined, and also the core of the present time. Simply put, this meditation cushion was actually something that was fixed in the time spectrum. As long as it existed, time could flow normally, and space would exist normally. If this meditation cushion was gone or destroyed, space and time would be in chaos, and all laws and matter would perish. This was the meditation cushion that Beginning sat on. After sitting down, I'll be the one occupying the position of Beginning. Kui Heng thought to himself, but where did the original owner go? Did he disappear so completely? Did he transcend, or did he go to the foreign realm? After thinking for a while, he decided to continue on the path he had already set. He would return to the beginning of time and occupy the entire timeline from the beginning of time to the present time. Hence, Kui Heng took a step forward and sat on the prayer mat. At the same time, the person who was originally trembling in fear and feeling that Kui Heng was about to be killed by High Lord Beginning suddenly felt something and could not help but look up at the figure sitting on the meditation cushion. Then, he seemed to have been struck by lightning and froze there. His gaze was completely stagnant, and his thoughts had completely stopped spinning. He was motionless like a puppet. That was because at this moment, High Lord Beginning who was sitting on the meditation cushion no longer looked familiar to him. He actually looked like Kui Heng. Moreover, it was not just this time point. From this moment onwards, in the endless years that followed, High Lord Beginning actually became Kui Heng. At the same time, the supreme god of man also felt that his inherent understanding had changed. A new message appeared in the many pieces of information that he had synchronized from the future. High Lord Beginning did not leave this world. He just disappeared from the eyes of all living beings. Actually, He had been watching over the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea from the void. What's going on? What just happened? Why did it become like this? The supreme god of man found this unbelievable, and he could not understand why such a situation had happened. It was true that he knew that Kui Heng was occupying the timeline, but he did not dare to imagine that Kui Heng would occupy the position of beginning in the timeline. This was too crazy and exaggerated. How could he do such a thing? Unbelievable. While the supreme god of man was still immersed in extreme shock, Kui Heng had already completed the unification and weaving of the timeline. He sat on the meditation cushion and a long time passed before his eyes. He looked at the shocked supreme god of man and said in a low voice, "From now on, I'm the beginning." After Kui Heng occupied beginning's position in the timeline, he could clearly feel his cultivation realm begin to soar. Initially, he only occupied one point in time, but his cultivation realm had already advanced by leaps and bounds. When he began to integrate the subsequent periods in the timeline and weave another timeline, his cultivation realm began to soar, quickly approaching the limit of the late-stage return to void realm. This process was extremely fast. In the outside world, it might not even have taken 3 seconds. In this short period of time, Kui Heng completed a series of extreme sublimations. His overall strength was countless times stronger than 3 seconds ago, and his various abilities had also increased countless times. 780 From now on, I am the ancestor of creation, 2. 780 From now on, I am the ancestor of creation, 2. However, although Kui Heng's actions of occupying, integrating, and weaving the timeline were huge, it did not affect most living beings. After all, even experts at the perfected immortal emperor realm or even those who had surpassed the perfected immortal emperor realm did not have the qualifications to come into contact with existences like the beginning and end. Moreover, in the timeline set by Kui Heng, he was only an observer outside the primordial world and the boundless chaos sea. He would not interfere in anything. Therefore, the overall timeline did not change much. However, to the person who had personally witnessed all of this series of changes was no less than letting him personally witness the creation of the world. It was too shocking. Right in front of him, Kui Heng sat on the meditation cushion and occupied the position of beginning in history. He could actually do this. He could actually occupy the position of beginning in the river of time. This was simply unbelievable. However, no matter how shocked he was, his rationality was still there. After recognizing all the changes, he was enlightened and kowtowed again. "Greetings, High Lord Beginning." Kui Heng slowly stood up from the meditation cushion. He looked at the person kneeling on the ground and smiled. "Get up." Only then did the supreme god of man stand up respectfully and bow. "Thank you, High Lord. There's no need to be so formal." Kui Heng waved his hand gently and said, "Next, there will still be some changes in the past timeline. You have to be prepared." "Thank you for your reminder, High Lord." The supreme god of man hurriedly bowed and thanked him. Actually, he could already predict what was going to happen next. However, when he learned that this was really going to happen, he could not help but tremble in his heart. Kui Heng had only become High Lord beginning from this time point and remained in this position for countless years in the future. He had yet to occupy the earlier parts of the timeline, let alone return to the starting point of time and become the ancestor of creation. His next step would probably be to take this path. The starting point of this world would change, and so would the person who created the world. From now on, the source of the entire world would undergo a fundamental change. And all of this came from a powerful existence who had attained the Tao countless years later. Such a thing actually happened. This was a prime example of not becoming strong because he's ancient, but becoming ancient because he was strong. Countless years after the creation of the world, he had attained the Tao, but he had returned to the past and occupied the time points before his existence. Eventually, he directly occupied the starting point of time and became the ancestor of creation. There was actually a cultivation method that could reach this realm. The heart of the supreme god of man could not calm down for a long time. When he came back to his senses, he felt that the past in his memory had changed. Especially the parts related to the original High Lord beginning. This shocked him. He subconsciously looked at Kui Heng, who was standing beside him. He opened his mouth but closed it again without saying anything. He had already realized that Kui Heng had begun to occupy an even more ancient period in the timeline. From this time forward, the High Lord beginning in the more ancient years would also become him. Everything would become different. In the future, there will be a true paragon in this world. The bright silver river of time flowed under Kui Heng's feet, and ancient lights and shadows flickered before his eyes. He was getting closer and closer to the beginning of time. The laws of heaven and earth began to turn from stable to chaotic, from complicated to simple and primitive. The world became smaller and smaller, and there were fewer and fewer substances. Living beings were even more indistinct. That was because, be it laws, matter, or living beings, they were all the results of the expansion of the concept of existence of the three supreme gods. The closer one got to the front, the less this expansion would be. The composition of the world would also be simpler and more primitive. As Kui Heng continued to move forward, the timeline already became incomparably ancient. In this extremely long time ago, even the river of time was different. It was no longer a clear bright silver color, but had become a little turbid, like the color of black and white. At the same time, Kui Heng felt that his progress of traveling back in time had begun to slow down. The turbid river of time seemed to contain a huge resistance, preventing him from continuing to rewind to an even more ancient time point. It even prevented him from seeing the situation of the world at this time clearly. However, to the current Kui Heng, such resistance could only have an extremely weak effect. It would not really stop him from rewinding time and occupying the past timeline. After feeling this resistance, an incomparably bright ball of light flew out of Kui Heng's body. This was the Great Tao Light, the external manifestation of Kui Heng's cultivation. In this boundless void, the Great Tao Light emitted endless light, as if the laws of a complete world were contained in this light, illuminating the turbid river of time. The various chaos from before had been sorted out clearly, and the force that obstructed Kui Heng's advance also disappeared without a trace. Then, the situation of the world at this time was all presented in Kui Heng's perception. In the vast void, within the initial black-yellow chi, an incomparably huge ball of clear chi was rising endlessly. An incomparably huge ball of turbid chi was descending, and as time passed, it condensed into different states. The clear chi rose to the sky, and the turbid chi sank to the ground. It was the time when the world had just been established and the world was separated into clear and turbid. In the original timeline, two supreme existences, beginning and end, had already been born. But now, in Kui Heng's perception, there was only natural primordial chi and natural yin and yang chi. There were no living beings in the world. Clearly, the original beginning that should have existed at this time had already disappeared. This also meant that, just like before, as long as Kui Heng descended to this time point and occupied the position of beginning, he could become the real beginning and occupy the timeline from this time onwards. There were no obstacles. Did beginning really leave this world and even transcended? Kui Heng was a little puzzled. The process of going back in time was too smooth, especially after crossing the era of the three supreme gods. Beginning's departure or disappearance was as if he was specially making way for him so that he could easily return to the starting point of this world. If this is done on purpose, what benefits can there be for him? Kui Heng thought to himself. If I can see him in the future, I must ask him personally. Now, I should return to the beginning of time as soon as possible and occupy all the timelines from the beginning of the world to the present. This way, I can break through to the peak return to Void Realm. Thinking of this, he no longer hesitated and rushed forward. In an instant, Kui Heng passed through endless time. In his perception, all matter and laws had disappeared. The separated yin and yang, clear and turbid chi, had gathered together again. This was the initial chaos before the creation of the world. Beginning should have broken through this initial chaos, broke through the primordial chaos, divided yin and yang, established the river of time, and created the world here. Now, it was Kui Heng's turn. He did not know how beginning had split open the sky in the past, nor did he know if he had used any special methods when he first split open the sky. However, It was not difficult for him to split open the sky now. Hence, Kui Heng raised his right hand and clenched it lightly. Immediately, a long sword that flickered with purple-gold light condensed in his hand. This sword contained incomparably mysterious power, as if it could perfectly explain the source of all worlds. Tao Life Sword. From now on, Kui Heng raised the Tao Life Sword and slashed down gently. The chaos rumbled, and yin and yang were divided into clear and turbid parts. I'm the ancestor of creation. "781 The path after that is blank. 781 The path after that is blank." The moment Kui Heng became the ancestor of creation was the moment he occupied the starting point of time. The source of this world changed. All the great Tao and laws that once originated from the beginning became illusory and disappeared. In its place were the laws and dharmas based on the great Tao Kui Heng cultivated. From the initial scale of the 3,000 great Tao and the 480 million laws when Kui Heng was at the peak soul formation realm, the number of great Tao laws he controlled had long increased countless times. Their essence was already extremely high and could completely be used as the foundation of a world. Simply put, after Kui Heng occupied the starting point of time, the foundation of this world began to change drastically. Even though it looked no different from before, the source was completely different. Whether it was the composition of the heaven-earth essence qi, the rules of the existence of matter, the great Tao that flowed naturally, or even the way time flowed, they all became based on Kui Heng's will and his cultivation as the source. It was at this moment that Kui Heng finally understood what the flow of the origin myriad Tao was, what the initial starting point was, and why this realm was powerful. Now, my body can no longer be described as purely my own state. Kui Heng understood something in his heart. After occupying the starting point of time and becoming the ancestor of creation, everything that was born from the beginning to present is actually a part of me. Even the origin of time is a part of me. From the initial time to the current time, all the living beings and substances born during this period, be it the primordial world, the chaos sea, the three supreme gods, or the incountable living beings, are all a part of me. At this moment, Kui Heng's aura had also become incomparably majestic and mysterious. If anyone could see him in his current state, they would immediately feel as if they were facing the source of the great Tao and feel that Kui Heng was an omnipotent great being. Just by standing there, Kui Heng's body would naturally produce endless light and shadow phenomena. Among them, countless worlds and universes were born and destroyed constantly. Countless powerful living beings were born, formed, and destroyed. This cycle never stopped. The strongest among these countless living beings was capable of reaching the late-stage return to void realm. There were even more experts at the immortal ancestor realm. However, to Kui Heng, this was like a dream without any real feeling. It was like an illusion. All matter and laws were born according to his will, and they also existed according to his will. If he wanted chaos to appear, chaos would appear. If he wanted to open up a world, the world would open up. Everything was done as he wished. There would be no obstacles. From the beginning of time to the present time, in these endless years, all space-time, worlds, universes, and living beings had to change according to his wishes. In this incomparably long timeline, Kui Heng could easily reverse all cause and effect, reverse the present and the past, and even easily violate logic. What was omnipotence? This was omnipotence. Kui Heng suddenly understood why the return to void realm was called the return to void realm. The process of cultivating in the return to void realm was actually a process of allowing one to complete an internal cycle and no longer rely on their environment. From then on, they would be eternally proven and would no longer be affected by any external objects. This was the absolute truth. Other than himself, everything else was actually like an illusion. He could control and change it at will. So this is the peak return to void realm. Kui Heng could not help but sigh. According to the standards of Earth, I'm already equivalent to a being who has unified the multiverse that has existed for countless years. However, I haven't occupied the entirety of the timeline yet. I only occupied the timeline from the beginning of time to the present. And there's still the endless future and the final endpoint which stretches beyond the present. Next, What I have to do is to occupy the future timeline and take advantage of all the possibilities in the timeline. When I completely occupy the starting point and control the river of time, I'll complete the cultivation of the peak return to void realm. I'll know everything and be truly omnipotent. The path to cultivate in the peak return to void realm was already incomparably clear. There was no need to peruse the high-level immortal technique, from initiate to immortal ascension. With Kui Heng's own judgment, he could clearly see the path ahead. However, the clearer the path from the peak return to void realm, the more puzzled he felt. His cultivation had already reached this stage. After completing the cultivation in the peak return to void realm, he would be truly omnipotent. In that case, what was the Tao integration realm that was above that? Tao integration. What kind of Tao must he integrate with? With such doubts in mind, Kui Heng returned to the Grotto Heaven Tao Palace and took out the high-level immortal technique, from initiate to immortal ascension. However, this time, he did not directly exchange for reading time. Instead, he circulated his dharmic powers and planned to use his strength to flip it. Before this, he could only open this high-level immortal technique after exchanging for reading time. Actually, Kui Heng had once tried to open it with his own strength. But he failed every time. However, the situation this time was clearly different. Kui Heng circulated his dharmic powers at the peak return to void realm and enveloped the high-level immortal technique. Then, he easily flipped it open. The improvement from the late stage to the peak return to void realm was too huge. It was impossible to describe it accurately with words. After such an improvement, the power that stopped him from flipping open the high-level immortal technique already seemed incomparably frail. It could not affect him at all. After Kui Heng flipped open the high-level immortal cultivation technique, a familiar immortal cultivation technique appeared in front of him, but it was a little different this time. Compared to what he had seen when he exchanged for reading time, the contents of this high-level immortal technique were clearly more detailed. How could a foundation establishment cultivator make his dharmic powers more agile? How could he activate his Tao foundation? How could he ignite true fire to calcine his Tao foundation C into a golden core? How could a golden core have spirituality and evolve into a nascent soul? There were all of these. From Qi refinement to the return to void realm, there was a very detailed description and explanation of how to cultivate and break through each realm. The general cultivation concept that he had to struggle to comprehend in the past were not there at all. In the past, the specific cultivation method had to be explored by him every step of the way. It's actually so detailed. Kui Heng was a little surprised, but he was not too affected. After all, he actually did not need the detailed steps for the previous realms anymore. He even felt a little happy now. Since the previous realms were described so clearly, the subsequent Tao integration realms should be very detailed as well. However, when Kui Heng flipped through the contents of the return to void realm, he did not see any description of the Tao integration realm. Instead, he saw the cultivation methods of spells. From ordinary spells like Anedia, eating wind and drinking dew, and body strengthening, to supreme immortal techniques like Daoi seal, Taiji diagram, and ultimate sword, there were all very detailed records. This also meant that from now on, he no longer needed to deduce spells. No matter what direction or type of spell he needed, he could just flip through this high-level immortal technique to search for it. The cultivation method of the Tao integration realm is actually behind these spells. Kui Heng was a little puzzled. Such a structure was a little illogical. However, when he flipped through the chapter about spells, his movements suddenly froze. His gaze froze as he stared at the high-level immortal technique without moving. After a while, Kui Heng came back to his senses slightly. He frowned and muttered, "What does this mean?" Behind the contents of the spell section, there was indeed a page with the words Tao integration written on it. Logically speaking, there should be a description of the Tao integration realm cultivation. However, that was not the case. Behind this page were pages of white paper. Not a single word was written, let alone a description of the Tao integration realm. The path after the peak return to void realm was actually blank. (782) Occupying the future. 782 Occupying the future. I didn't expect this immortal technique to be like this. Kui Heng couldn't help but chuckle. However, this situation was indeed beyond his expectations. After getting used to knowing the subsequent cultivation path as long as he flipped through this immortal technique, he was very curious about this sudden situation. It also caused some doubts to appear in his heart. Although this immortal technique did not have a description of the Tao integration realm, it pointed to the peak of the return to void realm. It was enough for the person who cultivated this technique to reach the level of being omnipotent and omniscient. Then who created this immortal technique and what realm had he reached? Why did the benefits given by the system include this immortal technique? Was his transmigration and the origin of the system related to this immortal technique? To this day, Kui Heng could clearly determine that the core of the system's benefits was this immortal technique. Whether it was the Grotto Heaven, the Tao Palace, or other aspects, they were just supplementary. Thinking of this, Kui Heng spread out his divine sense. After a moment of hesitation, he began to analyze the existence of this Grotto Heaven and the system. But he found nothing. The essence of the Grotto Heaven was a little similar to the primordial world at the beginning of the world. The great Tao laws were extremely complete, but it was completely independent in the timeline. This also meant that he could not see the past of this space, nor could he see the future of this space. It was very mysterious. The system was even more mysterious. He could not even find out what kind of existence the system was. Whether it existed in him or only established a connection with him through a mysterious method, he did not know. Even with my current realm, I can't understand the mysteries within. I'm afraid I'll have to completely reach the limits of the peak return to void realm before I can investigate the system further. Kui Heng ended his investigation of the system and shook his head gently. He thought to himself, there's no hurry. I should finish the last part of my cultivation first. After making his decision, he left the Grotto Heaven Tao Palace and returned to the present time. Although the source of the starting point of time had changed, under Kui Heng's series of subtle controls, the surface situation of the timeline had not changed at all, and no one sensed this change. He could maintain the previous stability to the greatest extent without causing historical deviation and chaos, avoiding some unnecessary trouble. After doing all of this, Kui Heng left the place. However, what he wanted to do this time was not to go back in time, but to explore the future, occupy the timeline of the future, and grasp the many possibilities of the future until he occupied the position of end. Above the river of time, Kui Heng appeared in an omnipresent state and began to observe the tributaries in different directions, which was to observe the different possible futures. At this moment, the river of time he saw was completely different from before. From the past to the present, the river of time was only a single line. Even if there were any changes, it would only change the river itself and no other splits would appear. This was the fixed past. However, going to the future from the present time was different. Although the future outcome was already destined, leading to the end of nirvana, the process in between was very different. There were countless different possibilities and directions. Simply put, the timeline from past to present was like the trunk of a tree, and the branches that grew in different directions from the present represented all the different futures. These futures that grew from the present time point could also be used as a new trunk and extend to more futures in different directions, so much so that they were endless. In these different futures, there were endless universes, worlds, and living beings. They could be understood as countless parallel spacetimes that could be produced according to every possible outcome from the present. Only a parallel space that occupied the endless possibilities of the future and unified everything could truly allow him to exist alone in the timeline. If I take over the future, my body will be countless times stronger than now. Kui Heng looked at the endless tributaries in front of him and could not help but fall into deep thought. Is this really just a small realm? The future was uncertain and there were countless possibilities. Even if he followed a timeline to the end and occupied all the worlds in the universe in this timeline, he would have only occupied one timeline. There were countless other parallel futures to this timeline. Why was it not enough? He had to occupy all the timelines in order to truly reach the end of the peak return to void realm. One could imagine how powerful his body would be after reaching that realm. Under normal circumstances, Such a thing was almost impossible to complete. No one could summarize all the countless futures and explore them. The changes in the future were too complicated. Any subtle change in the current node could cause huge waves in the river of time in the future, triggering unexpected changes. However, this was not impossible for Kui Heng. With his past cultivation, he had long achieved omnipresence in the sense of space and spread this characteristic to the past while occupying the past. Therefore, be it the present or the past, there were countless Kui Hengs at the same time. Every Kui Heng could be used as a start point to occupy the endless future. While occupying the future, the omnipresent characteristics would also appear at the time of the future. This way, he could continue to have countless starting points. And so on, he could continue to extend endlessly until he occupied the future completely. After clarifying the method, Kui Heng began to take action. Now, countless Kui Hengs from the present stepped into different futures at the same time, engraving their existence in that space-time and occupying that time point before continuing to spread further. The countless tributaries divided by the river of time quickly filled with Kui Heng's figures. Every possible future would be occupied by Kui Heng. This also meant that Kui Heng would have absolute control over the future. What he wanted to happen in the future would happen in the future. And the future he did not want to see would never appear. Any universe, world, living beings, civilization, or even everything else had to follow his will if they wanted to develop in the future. This was omnipotence. It was precisely because of this that if there were already other existences occupying the future that this process would definitely be extremely difficult. However, the beginning and end had already disappeared. Not only was the past timeline clean, but the future timeline was also the same. This allowed Kui Heng to not feel any obstacles in the process of occupying the future. None of the future tributaries could stop him. He almost effortlessly occupied all the timelines of the future and controlled all the possibilities of the future. However, this also made him feel even more clearly that all the futures and possibilities pointed to one thing: the end of the river of time. From Kui Heng's perspective, all the future possibilities began to gather towards one direction. Whether it was the extremely prosperous future, the future that had long fallen into the final tribulation, or other futures, they gradually began to die out and walk towards the same outcome. Kui Heng's eyes flickered with a faint golden light. His gaze landed at the end of the river of time. It was a pitch-black void, like the final destination of everything. Is this the end? "783 Her Big Brother Immortal. 783 Her Big Brother Immortal. What was the end?" This was a question Kui Heng had been thinking about before. Would everything return to nothingness, or would everything be destroyed? If that was really the case, what kind of rules were followed? Was it the laws of nature, or was someone secretly manipulating all of this? Before reaching this final outcome, no one knew the answers to these questions. At this moment, Kui Heng was already standing before the end point. The countless timelines behind him had already become the past. As long as he took another step forward, he could step into the end of this time, the end of everything, and find out the truth. At the same time, he would truly complete the last step of the peak return to Void Realm and reach the end of the return to Void Realm. From then on, he would know everything and be omnipotent. The current me is infinitely close to the end of the return to Void Realm. Kui Heng sensed his state and thought to himself, from the beginning of time to the time when everything is about to end, everything was born with me as the foundation. It's equivalent to being a part of me. If I occupy this position of end, I will completely dominate the timeline from birth to death. I just don't know what is after the end. He had no way of answering this question. After all, as long as one was still standing before the end, they would not know what to expect beyond it. After thinking for a while, Kui Heng decided to continue forward and step into this place where all possibilities and the future ended. Hence, scenes began to appear in front of his eyes. There were scenes of the universe collapsing and chaos being destroyed, of time stopping, of everything being eternally destroyed, of mighty figures fighting each other to the point of destruction. This was a scene of countless endings, and countless future possibilities all pointed to the final apocalypse. At the same time, Kui Heng felt his cultivation realm increase rapidly again. In the blink of an eye, he became countless times stronger, and the essence of his life was sublimated to the extreme, completely reaching the extremes of the peak return to void realm. Omniscience and omnipotence. Whether it was the primordial world or the endless chaos sea, any matter, laws, living beings, and so on, there were no more mysteries for Kui Heng. Moreover, they would all change according to his wishes. Although Kui Heng already had a similar ability when he occupied the position of beginning, he was still unable to control the future and final outcome at that time. Now, it was different. He could already control everything. "This is the end of the peak return to void realm," Kui Heng muttered, his eyes flickering with countless lights. "So that's how it is. After the end, there's nothingness." Now, he could see all the possibilities from the beginning of time to the end at a glance, and he could change all of this at will. Even the 300 years he had spent in the system space had changed from a state where he could not trace back to a state he could control. At this moment, Kui Heng had truly achieved the uniqueness of the timeline. He occupied all the spacetime in the past, present, and future and had reached an indescribable realm. But even so, he still had doubts in his heart. "I've already reached this realm. What is the path ahead? What's the Tao integration realm?" Kui Heng thought to himself, and where did Chichi, beginning and end go? Did they really go to the world where Earth is? What's so special about the world where Earth is? Is there really a so-called transcendent opportunity? Of course, other than these doubts, he had another biggest question. It was about the system. Actually, the moment Kui Heng completed his breakthrough, he had already seen through the huge essence of the system. The system's notification and communication function relied on the grotto heaven space. This grotto heaven space was hidden in the deepest part of his true spirit. He only discovered it just now. For example, the Tao Palace, Guardian, Flying Sword, Dharma Robe, and other functions were all minor details. As long as one had a certain level of cultivation, they could realize these functions themselves. There were no more secrets. What Kui Heng was most concerned about was the essence of the grotto heaven. It seemed to have evolved from an extremely mysterious substance. This substance seemed to contain the concept of everything and was the foundation of the existence of everything. However, it also seemed to be a little incomplete. The aura of this substance is somewhat similar to the power that affected the supreme god of man. Is the system also related to Earth? Kui Heng frowned slightly and thought to himself, "Looks like I can only find the answer to all the mysteries after I go to the world where Earth is. Perhaps I can also find out why this thing appeared in the form of a system." The system was only the appearance of that mysterious substance, and it meant that the mysterious substance was really a system. Why did this strange and mysterious substance appear in the state of a system and attach itself to him, providing him with so much help? There must be a huge secret hidden behind it. Perhaps this also concerns why I transmigrated to this world and how I should walk the path after the return to Void Realm. Kui Heng closed his eyes slightly and took a light breath. He had already made up his mind to leave this place and head to the world where Earth was. Previously, he had obtained a spacetime imprint that led to the world where Earth was. Through it, he could descend to the solar system at any time. However, at that time, he felt that there was an extremely powerful barrier between this world and the solar system. With his cultivation at that time, he could not pass through it. The situation was completely different now. Kui Heng gently raised his right hand, and a ball of light immediately appeared. Light and shadows that looked like the solar system flickered inside, as if it was guiding the way. The resistance that had once made it difficult for him to pass no longer existed. A clear scene of the solar system even appeared in his perception. The place where Earth is indeed a completely different world from this one. Moreover, this time point is actually not far from the era I transmigrated from. Kui Heng understood. Then, he directly broke through the void and left along the spatial pathway, heading towards the solar system. November 10th, 2022. Milky Way, Solar System, Earth. Shanghai, Huaishu District, Huaihai Road. At a table in the corner of the Shanghai Library, A girl who looked to be in her late teens was focused on reading a book. Her facial features were exquisite and her appearance was beautiful. There was a sharpness in her eyes, adding to her heroic spirit and revealing an extraordinary temperament. However, the girl's attire was very ordinary. She was wearing a moon-white dress. She looked fresh and elegant, and she had a strong scholarly aura. She seemed to be a university girl who had yet to walk out of the ivory tower. Suddenly, she seemed to have sensed something. She was slightly stunned at first, then she suddenly looked up, her eyes filled with surprise as she muttered, Big brother immortal. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,